Okay, we are on the air now. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Board of County Commissioners work session on Tuesday, March 26th. Commissioner Postman is in Chile right now. He is our chairman, and so I am, as vice chair, chairing this meeting. I was just at the Veterans Coffee and Donuts in the library, and it was the last day for Janine Barth doing the coffee and donuts. She's unfortunately having to quit her position as our Veteran Service Officer. So we had a pretty good turnout of veterans there today. So first on our agenda is a discussion about site planning of the Phillips Mobile Home Park. And Phyllis is taking the lead on this, so why don't you start, Phyllis, and then I'm sure you're going to hand it off to our guests.
So Phyllis Matthijs, Deputy County Manager. And just to kind of focus where we are in this project, we're coming on to the end of our phase one, which was really the start of what is possible at the Phillips property that we purchased February a year ago. The 40 some odd residents that live there, what's the conditions, what's the infrastructure needs of the property, and what should be there, kind of. So that's where we've been analyzing. We've been with DHM Consulting, Laura Kirk and Bob Schultz of Bob Schultz Consulting. Okay. Have been our consultants on the project, speaking with residents, evaluating infrastructure, evaluating property. So one of the key things that we identified for today is if we can get an idea of the number of residents that are residences that should be on this property. We had a beginning of our discussion, it's about a month ago, when we gave you a 3 different options kind of to look at that ranged from 20 residences to 120 residences, thereabout. So we'll go through that again, looking at some of the infrastructure that we need to put there. We want this project from our conversations last time to be sustainable for the residents that live there, for it to continue to be a community of residents. So with that, there's some current needs, and I'll let Laura and Bob go over. So we want a confirmation on our on those, also the current needs, things like wildfire mitigation projects. We think going into the summer, this is a great time to be discussing some of those so we can do planning and get some improvements on the property, even if we don't specifically know what's going to happen on what parts. There's some immediate needs there. So that's kind of the introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Laura and Bob.
Okay. So we're just going to go through a review of what we think we heard from you the last time we were here, which was about a month ago, to get confirmation on that, and then talk a little bit about next steps. And John and Phyllis have gathered some additional financial information to review with you. And so that will set the stage then for moving forward with phase 2. So just a reminder that we started meeting with you in August of last year, and so today we're coming to you to move forward with final recommendations that will inform phase 2 planning process.
So after we left, we kind of compared notes. And
Is your mic turned on?
Red light has to be
Move that a little, just move it closer to you too.
talked about what did you hear, and tried to make sure that we could accurately as possible reflect what we heard from your discussion. And so we're going to go through a few slides that have tried to capture that discussion and ask you to either confirm that's the direction we want to be heading or make adjustments based on, I've been thinking about this and I want to talk to my other board members about making some adjustments from what we discussed last time. So in the discussion about how many units belong out there, what we heard was that we want to accommodate the number of units that are there today, and if there are some opportunities for a modest number of additional units that make sense and that help with the project finances, bring us those alternatives. We presented 3 alternatives, one that was just focused on the hillside area, and that netted about 31 units compared to the 41 that are in existence today. We heard you say that doesn't work. It's going to need to be at least what we have there today. And then we had a, what if we bought this property for affordable housing? What would we do with it? And create a village. And what we heard was that doesn't work. That's too much for this particular location, given our other planning values. So we thought we were in that range of at least what's there, plus some additional ones as it makes sense and helps with the project finances so that it's long-term sustainable for the folks that are going to be living there. On the unit mix side, we heard about obviously the existing units and have the ability to have mobile homes there. There was some level of interest in things like tiny homes or potentially some RVs that we would look at between Lower River Road and the Roaring Fork River, and we can do a little bit of work on that on phase 2. And the idea of doing some stick-built or modular quadplexes out there received kind of mixed reviews, so that we took it that we can keep that on the plate, but we didn't hear yeah, go, go, go. So we're going to need to come back fairly early in the process if that's a part of the mix, and get you the information that you need to give us a final determination on that. So the next piece of it was around probably one of the central findings of the health impact assessment, that housing security, as all of you know, is a huge issue, not just here but throughout the county, but in particular in a mobile home park situation. And there was a couple of ideas brought up around people having long-term security, and one of those might be a co-op type model, and another one might be a land ownership type model. And so when we do the site planning, that's another thing that will come back to you sooner rather than later in the process to get some determination, because that would feed into the ultimate land use application, is we would need to have that issue resolved. So one of the things that in phase 2 we would be working with staff on is bringing you some more detail about exactly what those 2 options involve, and asking you to give us direction on one of those. But the idea of looking for a future that involves more housing security than exists today or even in the recent past was, we heard, as a value to be pursued. The county obviously has experience in this from the other mobile home parks that it's been involved in, and we would want to learn from those experiences as well. Additional things that we heard that we would want to take into the site planning, that you didn't see a long-term future for units over on the Riverview side, so we needed to have a plan for the folks that were over there. That the first order health and safety issues are sort of non-negotiables and the highest priority, but if there's some other code-related things that we needed to be flexible about, we could do that, but we weren't going to do that with health and safety issues. To examine the opportunity to preserve some agricultural lands, so we would want to look at soil suitability and the actual wet water that's available there, and come back to you with information on that. And that there was interest in doing work in conjunction with other county agencies to improve the riparian zone. And then finally, to look at the ability to do renewable energy, either on-site or as a part of the overall finances to the project if it's going to be off-site. In in the transition piece of this will obviously be really important to the existing residents. And so in the next phase in site planning, we had talked with at least Phyllis about the idea of maybe having a little bit more formalized group of owners involved in the process to be able to bounce ideas off of them on a regular basis as this thing starts to evolve, so that the transition isn't done in a black box, that it's very transparent when we're having discussions about, for instance, Riverview, and when and how and those units might be relocated, or people would need to get a new unit, or whatever it would be, that there wouldn't be a mystery around how that happened, and that people were involved in it. The since that meeting, obviously a lot of communication. A fair number of residents, I sent out the link for the video of the meeting, and a fair number of residents watched it, and several of them contacted me. And there's a desire that the process doesn't get stuck, and people get into a limbo where they don't know what the future holds for them, and they can't sell their unit, and you know, the kind of things that you would worry about if you owned a unit there, and that we keep things moving along, and obvious questions about if you live at or own a unit at Riverview, what happens, you know, how does this unfold? So that's going to be something that people are going to want to continue dialoguing about. Phyllis and I did go to visit with the Woody Creek Caucus shortly after our last meeting. You may remember Bill Dinsmore was here. We had a nice chat and brought them up to speed. It really wasn't it was more of an informational presentation than any opining a whole lot about different alternatives. It was more making sure they knew what was going on, what your general comments were at our last meeting, and then what the next steps would be. So we'd obviously keep them in the loop as this starts to move towards a land use application.
So, just a reminder that, so option number 2 was the no net loss, and as Bob said, what we heard from, what we think we heard was no net loss plus some. Exactly where the placement of the units is what we would look at in the next phase. And so this has many more units as kind of option 4, the no net loss plus some. Then we would come back to you with, but these are the areas that we would be looking at to give you an evaluation of, you know, should there be some kind of units above the existing mobile homes there, that kind of number 5. What opportunities are there to develop in the ag field, and what are the kind of opportunities or constraints versus that, versus opportunities versus constraints. And then if you look on the south side of Lower River Road, there are some opportunities for development there as well, and the bullet numbers 6 and 7, and some of those might be desirable for people that say we're on the river side, maybe transitioning over to units on the other side of the river, but still having closer proximity to the river corridor. So I think, you know, today, if there are any areas that you consider completely off limits, that would be helpful to understand. Otherwise, we'll continue to do a deeper level of analysis work on exactly where those 40-plus units would be located.
Steve, can I?
Yeah.
Looking at study areas for phase 2, just looking at your little number 5, the quadplexes. No, for me. Building further up into the hillside and further down. I liked the page before that with the new 9 lots.
Yep.
That development, you could maybe, there could possibly be some expansion there, but not quite for me to the extent that you have on the option 4.
Okay.
I, of course, would love to see some development for small lots for tiny homes.
Yep.
Be they RVs on, tiny homes on RV structures on an axle or more permanent. I think tiny homes on axles, considered quote-unquote RVs by building code, might be the way to start, because we do have a population of these younger generations who come here for seasonal work or for long-term living who live in tiny homes on axles, and it works. And it works in the small spaces, especially if they have some kind of small storage shed in back, like the tiny home that's at Phillips now has. We're seeing them more and more across the country. We're seeing them more and more in this valley. So I would like to see us pursue that. I think that's going to be something we might as well address ahead of time instead of wishing we had in the future. As far as 4 on here, with new 5,000 square foot lots, I think we would really need to discuss that. That's a huge amount of development, and I'm not sure that would be appropriate there with both the existing residents, with the Woody Creek Caucus, with the neighbors who aren't really active in the Woody Creek Caucus, and maybe with this board as a whole. So, but I appreciate the effort, and giving us these options on a map really helps us, I think, to be able to look at what you're asking us to look at.
So Patty, are you thinking, you're looking at the ones on the 4 and the 5 that are the furthest south?
I'm looking at,
What about the 5 the number 5 that's kind of right behind the purple?
I'm looking at any of the 5. That's up on the hillside, and I don't think that's really a safe
So
place to
you're
further develop.
saying any of the number 5?
Any of the number 5s to me, and building further up to the hillside, I'm not sure would be acceptable. The hillside, because of the steepness and the wildfire issues. There's a significant slope factor up there. We've got rockfall, we've got drainage areas, and I don't have that information on here to see that exactly, but
In general, your costs are gonna go up quite a bit.
Yeah,
Because you're
thanks,
gonna
Mike.
need
Bob.
flat areas for parking and to accommodate the building foundation. You can cut into the slope some, but your costs just in general are less on a relatively lower slope.
And I also don't know what the visual impact from the Highway 82 would be if you're building up high. Right now, you can hardly see you have to really know what you're looking for if you're driving up the highway or down the highway, mostly up the highway. But I just don't think that that's an acceptable topographic area for development. Whereas number 4 on here in the yellow, maybe not 5,000 square foot lots, but some development in that area makes better sense to me.
Patty, I just put up,
Yeah, I'm looking at,
coming off of Google Earth,
oh,
the area behind where all the roads are
yeah,
was an area that the Phillips at some point
I'd wanted
planned
to.
on developing. And when I looked at one of the other views, you can kind of see where some of the.
Up above the cerise ditch.
Just above the cerise ditch, not up above the higher one.
Right.
And when you look at it, it's not that high up the slope. When you get to the upper roads, you are, but when you get
Right.
between the two lower
You can
ones.
kind of see the topographics here where that upper road then looks like there's a slope down to the lower roads.
Right.
I actually have never walked that. I've walked most of most of the Phillips Trailer Court, but I've never had the opportunity to walk up in there.
And I think that would be great. I think we should have a site visit and
Yeah.
go up there, so you get a really good sense of what that
It's hard to
topography
tell
is
from
like.
this if it's terraced.
It looks like it probably is.
It is kind of
But we
terraced.
need to walk it.
So that's the area between the two roads that we're talking about possible building something in there.
Yeah.
So, but a site visit as we move forward. So before we take it off, I think.
Yeah.
I understand where you're
Just
at.
the amount of development on that whole pink thing makes me a little concerned as to public acceptance of that.
And it's very well treed. When you look at it even from the eastbound, I ride the bus every day and I look at it every day to see where it would be and what it could look like.
Well, we also need to think about the fact we're probably going to be thinning those trees.
So, did you have something, Kelly?
No, that's a good point, though. Walking it would be, I think, great before I totally rule it out, but I just would rather see the development down lower for lots of reasons, but doesn't mean we shouldn't look at development up higher if it makes sense.
We've also talked with the county about having a drone flown from like bus level height so that we could see what the visual impact would be of any future development.
I'd rather ride the bus than use a drone. I know we have one.
You wouldn't have to actually be on the drone, though.
I know.
So do you have anything right now, George?
I do, thank you.
Okay.
Do we have sort of an average lot size currently?
So there's the code lot size, and there's what has happened in other mobile home parks that the county has facilitated, and then there's what's out there today. So the code would want us to be at 5,000 square foot lots. So the places where you saw the 5,000 square foot lots, that's where that came from, was that if we were gonna do something new, that we would try and do it to be code compliant. What's in Woody Creek, what's in Lazy Glen, what's at Aspen Village, they bounce around, but it's not uncommon to find lots between 2,000 and 3,000 square feet. And what's out there today varies similarly. Probably the low end would be 1,500 to 1,800 square feet. And if you go like down on the lower end, the up valley end, there's a nice, probably 5,000 square foot lot.
They're bigger up there now.
Last one down there. So there's quite a range. And as Phyllis had sent me an email about, how many units are out there. Well, pick a year and there will be a different number of units out there. It's been as high as 47 at one point anticipated, and 79 when the county denied the rezoning to a mobile home park. We allowed it as a non-conforming use, and at that time there were 47 units, but 3 of them were campers that the county didn't want to stay out there. And so, to my knowledge, the current allowance is for 44. And as a part of that same action in the 79, the units in Riverview were supposed to move across to an area just up valley of the place that you were discussing, Patty. They were given 5 years to relocate those Riverview units over in that area. So that may be why there were a couple of pads that kind of got roughed in at one point in anticipation of that occurring.
Yeah, thanks. It seems like knowing that we're going to have to relocate some residents, if they wish to be relocated there, some may wish to go elsewhere. But knowing that there are some currently over on the river side between River and Highway 82, and also knowing that some of the current locations of the trailers are probably not even close to addressing at least fire code, never mind county code. I'm more concerned about fire code, fire and safety code. It would seem that it would be helpful, and maybe you've done this in sort of this study areas, in terms of trying to better distribute the current residents there to allow for the relocation and the movement separation where needed. I think we do and we should utilize some of our availability to be a little more flexible in terms of not actually coming up to code as it refers to 5,000 square foot if the norm is amongst all our trailer parks is between 2,000 and 3,000 square feet, and that seems to be working for all the trailer parks. I think we could be looking at that. I'm not as excited as Patty is about tiny homes, and I'll tell you, I mean, if someone wants to live in a tiny home as an option and purchase one, that's fine. I don't know if those numbers work out as being as cost effective as a traditional trailer, but that's fine. My concern is with the tiny homes as well as recreational vehicles that there may be a tendency to have more of a transitory population, and I would not want to see that occur, because that certainly does not lead to the stability of a community when you've got people coming and going, or like a KOA. So I would be I would be cautious about those, and I'm not even sure whether we'd want to look at how that might have to address our building codes for an RV type of vehicle. Tiny homes, you know, you can, similar to trailers, even though they may be on wheels, they can be permitted, as we've seen throughout all of our other trailer parks. But I've been concerned about people coming and going and changing the nature of a sort of a communal park. So, and I'm also assuming that at least for future residents that we would be utilizing APSHA guidelines. The ones currently there, perhaps we could have a variance as well, grandfathered in. But as for new people coming in, I think we'd want to utilize the current guidelines. So those are some of my initial thoughts right now.
Now, can I just tag on to George? I totally agree with you about the APSHA guidelines. We did that, I know, at Smuggler, because some of the places were actually affordable housing units that were owned by businesses in town and used as to house their employees. As those phased out, they were bought and purchased as somebody who lived here and qualified by APSHA guidelines. I think that's important that we look at with people that may qualify now and may not, and especially if there's some use of some of the existing residences by people who technically don't live here. They rent them out. And maybe we need to look at that to see, in some cases, to grandfather them or not, and say, I'm sorry, you have to, if you own your home, we have to look at that. And any time there's a transition of the current residents, then they would have to qualify in the future. If anything, we don't want to displace people because they don't qualify by new guidelines that we're enforcing upon them. And as far as the relocation of the Riverview properties, we obviously we've been talking that since the late 70s. I didn't know that the county had permitted that back then, and asked them to move within 5 years. So I think trying to work on a plan, I know that that's a great place to live down there. It's their own little Eden down there, and everybody loves it, but we really have to look at life safety issues, especially in light of flooding that's occurring in places we never thought it would occur in this country, let alone in our own valley. So I think that's something we need to be looking at closely and working with those tenants in there really carefully.
One other question I have or point is, we have a page in terms of the property cost estimates, and it goes from the number of units. We've got at least the range that you've highlighted, 40 to 50 to 60 units. And you've got some numbers in terms of costs. Have you run these numbers by the residents, and are some getting sticker shock, or some realizing this is what's going to be needed to be able to provide the infrastructure that's needed at Phillips?
I'll let John get into the numbers, but the communication, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, would you mind if we just hold your question until we run through, until they present
guys gonna
that
present
Oh,
portion?
I didn't know. I didn't know
Yes.
they were going to present it.
Okay,
Yep.
well, I'm assuming they are if it's in this packet, but
That's fine.
thank you. I appreciate it.
So
John, you
this
want-
is Mr. John.
Yeah, just briefly, we talked about this last time, but we're trying to take a comprehensive look through our planning study as it relates to our three core focus areas in the strategic plan. And it really breaks down to three key questions that we're going to need to come back to and really find a balance between, which is, how do land use policies and urban growth boundary limitations influence decisions as far as how much or how little to further develop on the property. What level of preserving and or creating affordable housing should occur on the property. So on one hand, you have a strategic plan initiative that would suggest, we want to develop as much affordable housing as possible to meet the needs of our workforce and our community. We also have land use policies that have historically suggested that those should take place within urban growth boundaries and such. So we're working through kind of right versus right questions as we go through this process, and you'll need to keep those in mind and finding the right balance. And then the last point, which George, you're already touching on, and we're going to talk about here pretty soon, is within all that, then how do you balance the financial realities of making this development sustainable in the long term without needing ongoing subsidies, and those are the numbers that we'll get into in a bit. So all of those kind of need to be balanced. Sometimes they work in concert, sometimes they work against each other. So I'm wondering if I should use the laser pointer.
John, can I just make a comment on the urban growth boundary issue and the policy that the county adopted some years ago, and it should probably come back for the county to think about again. As I remember it, that policy decision was made based on taking into consideration expanding affordable housing opportunities in area where there already was affordable housing outside the urban growth boundary. The real policy decision point was creating new affordable housing projects outside the urban growth boundary. So I think, for at least in my mind, Phillips is an appropriate place to look at increasing affordable housing opportunities outside of the urban growth boundary. Just to clarify, that was a very clear discussion point of the board when that policy decision was made.
And it's just something that
Yeah, we
we'll
need to-
need some clarity from you guys.
And I think at some
going
point,
forward.
we maybe want to come back to the board for discussion, just in overall, not specific to Phillips.
So, first of all, to answer your question, George, no. These numbers have not been run by the residents at this point. We wanted to give you kind of a order of magnitude estimate of how we saw the finances working out based on the level of development. And so I'm just going to run through. There's a lot of numbers on this chart, but it's actually laid out pretty simply. These are estimates. I want to emphasize these are estimates. They're not final engineered numbers or what have you, but the way that we derive them for the infrastructure costs, we did consult with SGM on the different potential development scenarios for what infrastructure costs would be for the roads, for the dry in on the water, for the wastewater infrastructure. The operating costs were derived by looking at the new Woody Creek Metro District. They're probably the closest approximation because they also have a package plant now and a operator and have some operating costs associated with that. So we took their budget and we scaled it based on number of units. So this is probably at this point a plus or minus kind of 10% kind of budget number, but it gives you an idea in terms of order of magnitude what the impacts are for number of units. And so what you see, this row up here is number of units going from 20 up to 96, and I'll explain how we got to that nice round number at the end, going up in 10 unit increments. The general operations and maintenance, so that's going to include your trash, your landscape maintenance, snow plowing, basic road maintenance, property management kind of costs. These were derived really from looking at the Woody Creek Metro District and HOA costs and what they're budgeting for a year. They're scaled up depending on the number of units. You typically gain economies of scale. The more units you have, some costs are fixed regardless, some are not. Similarly, water and wastewater operations, when you have a package plant, you have to have a certain classification of operator for the wastewater and water functions. Those tend to be fixed regardless of the number of units. The difference comes in the amount of electricity used, chemicals, supplies, those sorts of things as you add units. So the numbers across, these are all annual costs, obviously. Major maintenance is an estimate based on what Woody Creek has experienced in terms of major kind of capital maintenance projects, whether it be either roads or landscaping or water, wastewater kind of facilities. Capital reserves are kind of a reserve number to build up savings so that when major capital needs to be replaced, and we've had these conversations about capital reserves, that there is a pot of cash to facilitate financing of that next major improvement and to keep it affordable for the residents. Typically doesn't pay for 100% of all major improvements. For example, the water, wastewater facilities would have a estimated 20-year lifespan after which they would need to be replaced. This would provide a cash up front to facilitate financing that would be paid for on an ongoing basis. Infrastructure repayment. This is basically the cost of repaying for the infrastructure improvements, the capital investments, the wastewater plant, new water distribution, any new road kind of cuts and pad cuts, utility placements, those sorts of things that would be required for the number of units. We really focused the baseline numbers really around this 50 unit, and then we scaled based on that. And so, for example, you tend to gain economies of scale at the higher numbers because you have a certain base level of investment, for example, that you have to make for a package plant, and then you can incrementally add on to that to add capacity. Okay? That does not assume any recovery of interest or lost investment income. This is basically 0% repayment over 20 years. So at that 50 unit number, and the reason these are highlighted 40, 50, and 60, this seemed to be the kind of range that the board was falling into in terms of number of units. That's why we highlighted those. That represents $2 million in infrastructure improvements. If there were to be a payback for investment interest lost or something, if the board were to do that, for example, at say 2.5%, which is roughly what we're estimating we'll get on our investments going forward, that is an $820,000 subsidy over 20 years, or about $42,000 a year. So that's a policy decision you guys would have to make. I just want you to know we assumed that you wouldn't be charging that. Contingency is just that. Sometimes major capital or such, or you miss on your estimates. It probably makes these numbers err on the conservative side, meaning probably a little bit higher than what the actual numbers would be. Per unit monthly operating and capital. So this line here, this is probably most like what the residents are paying for now. The residents are basically paying to be on the lot and be hooked up to the utilities, have the benefit of the property manager on site, the road maintenance and such, but there is no ownership necessarily of the land. There is ownership of the units. So what this would represent to cover the costs that were calculated up here is the monthly costs that residents would pay. The reason we have 96 is currently residents are paying $350 a month. I've got a cold and I've been taking cold medication, so bear with me as I go through this. $350. I wanted to back into the number of units that would be required to keep that constant going forward. You'd have to have an escalator, obviously. It'd go up year over year as costs go up. So as you go down, at 80 units, you're at $395 a month. 70 units, $428 a month, so on and so forth. In the range that you guys were, what we think we heard as staff, somewhere in that 40 to 60 unit range, and probably more likely in the 50 to 60 unit range. The monthly comparison to recover the costs above are anywhere from $473 a month to $536 a month. You guys, these are not set in stone. You guys could choose to subsidize differently or step in. This is, I think, most consistent, though, with what you've required of other communities to be sustainable, okay? Other things that we calculated for you so you could see where this is. Estimated modular purchase, this is in the $70,000 to $80,000 range, and getting hookups. You're probably at around $500 a month for
In
for
addition.
that. In addition, and that's for new.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put in, and again, this number would require a lot of conversation, but again, a subsidized land purchase cost if you guys wanted to go an ownership route, so that you could kind of see what that looks like. Subtotal, so this would be ownership plus new unit plus kind of the monthly. You can kind of see on a per unit basis on a monthly how that plays out. If you then look at it as 33% of gross annual income being an affordability standard, you can see the annual household income, not individual, but household incomes that would be required to roughly be considered affordable under that standard. Does that make sense? So
And those numbers take into consideration both the land purchase and the modular purchase. So
That's correct.
that's the high end of those estimates.
that's correct, yeah. I was trying to limit.
No, I like
I was
that.
going to lose it on the slide if I added another,
No, I
another
think
row
that's,
or two. Well, we went back, and there really is no category established for mobile homes in the APSHA guidelines. So we just went back and looked at the affordability guidelines. Where would these incomes, household incomes, fall for either one or two person households? And you can see in the range that you guys are, at least that we've heard, unless you give us different direction today, you're talking primarily category 2, and at 50 and 60 units for 2 people, category 1 type incomes. Does that make sense? Questions? Yeah. Kelly.
It does. I guess I have a a fundamental question about the larger ends of the unit size. So, we can get the input of 40 owners now and tell them exactly what their costs will be. But if we start to look at larger numbers, we're saying, okay, we're going to plan for this many units, and so current owners, this is the number you would anticipate. So say, we say, okay, we're going to go for 60, so current owners, you can anticipate an $1,100 cost. But how are we guaranteeing that those additional 20 units, that there will be people who will build them and buy them and fill them?
No, that's a risk as you become a developer, and so there's a lot that's unanswered in this spreadsheet. So if I could come back to your question and just make a couple more points. One, we actually don't have a full census yet of the folks that are there, and how they may qualify. And so you may want to think about having a mix of categories, which would change, the payer mix changes that affordability and changes that risk piece that you're talking about, I think, Kelly. The other piece is we have not at this point done a market analysis outside of the work that's been done recently through the Regional Housing Authority effort and the studies that have been done through APSHA that show that we tend to have far more need than we have inventory. And so we think the risk is low, that we would not be able to fill these units or fill these spaces. But there is risk there. We, to my knowledge, we did not engage your company to do that market analysis. And so that is an assumption that may bear further research.
I guess for me, the bigger risk I'm worried about is who's going to build them. We don't typically.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I didn't understand the question.
No,
So
you answered part of it too.
on the modular units, those would be brought on site. They're purchased. They're built. For the potential stick-built units, we would likely look at partnerships similar to what we've done with Habitat for Humanity, for example, and look to thread together various funding streams. We obviously have not put any proposals in front of Habitat for Humanity. We've had some preliminary discussions about whether they thought a model like that might work on this site, and I think they're willing to sit down and have those discussions. We haven't looked at the next step, though, of really getting into any further than that, how we would build any stick-built project until we got some direction about whether that was really something that the board was interested in. And if it is, we'll come back and answer those questions. Here's how we get from point A to point
John,
B.
and at Woody Creek, they were able to sell off those lots because they were subdivided anyway, and individuals bought the lot and built their homes themselves. So that's another thing we can take into consideration. Looking again at the history of the other trailer courts that we preserved, how we went about those specific needs and issues.
But we would have a choice of either building those ourselves and beating the developer, and then we would need to finance those. And we either do that on a cash basis if we carve off part of the property, or we finance it out and we have tools to do that, or we find a development partner.
Because I just want to comment on that. For me, this is an important question about the security aspect of the housing for the people who live there now, is looking at, understanding these numbers and their affordability of it. And I think it also just commits us to, whatever unit number we agree on, because that's what we're asking them to agree to as far as addressing, can you pay this, and does that fit in with your, monthly expenses and your own security about your house. So, I just want to be clear on that as we're saying that as a board.
And that is a policy decision that we definitely need direction from the board on.
Okay, George?
Two questions. So, John, on the amount that we have, where the residents are currently paying $350 a month, that is that includes everything. If they own the spot, or if they are paying rent, or
So nobody owns the underlying property. That $350 just includes the location, the site
Space
to
rent.
pull to have the home on. It includes the water, the wastewater,
utilities.
trash, not utilities.
not
Utilities are
utilities.
separate. Snow plowing, that sort of thing.
Basically space rental.
Space rental.
Space rent.
So that's more for somebody who rents a place that, they don't own the structure.
They would own the
No,
structure.
but for somebody who doesn't currently, there's some places where they're renting both the space and the house. So
Correct,
their rent is obvious, their monthly fee has to be higher. It can't be the $350. We don't know that yet.
And we don't know what that is, because in some cases, the person who owns the structure is an off-site owner. They have their own lease arrangement. What we know is what the sites are going for, which is $350.
Okay, and then under the land purchase, we're assuming that it would be land ownership by all the residents, or can you do a partial? I mean, how would that?
Yeah, so there's different models, and so these are numbers. There's a popular model out now is really what you'd call a co-op model, where the land is really owned by a co-op, and then the folks that are there buy shares in the co-op and can sell shares in the co-op. That's kind of like what Rock does.
I was gonna say, that sounds like,
That's like, yeah, and so there are programs out there in Colorado and New Hampshire, all over the country that have that kind of co-op model. And what works well about that is there tends to be a lot of technical support over 10 years to really help develop an HOA, a self-governance model, that sort of thing.
it's been successful in Boulder County, is my understanding, under
Yeah.
Rock.
We could look at, creating separate lots, based on the site plan and having ownership go that way. I think we're trying to get to the site plan, and then we can bring the transition and operating options back to you. There's options, for ownership, yeah.
And the concern would
That would
be
be different.
subdivision, which we've done at all the other parks.
Right.
Subdivision eventually wasn't always easy, it was very difficult with land use and lot sizes, et cetera. But the affordability then for the current owners of their homes to be able to afford their property. So that needs to be a decision. We talk to the homeowners now and say, if you want us to go towards land ownership, the costs are gonna be different, your management fees, and it creates a whole different cost estimate.
So the biggest thing, actually, and that's why I tried to isolate it in this, Patty, is this land purchase.
Yeah,
I think everything else would be pretty consistent. The costs are the costs. There would need to be a policy decision from the board, at what rate you would want to sell those off at. This is probably the least precise number in
Right.
the spreadsheet right now.
So I guess my last comment will be, because the residents haven't really seen these numbers yet,
Correct.
it'll be a bit of a sticker shot for at least
for some.
a few of them, probably more than a few. I mean, they're getting an incredible deal right now, frankly, probably better than any other resident in the county. And they've been able to enjoy that for however many years they've been there. But the reality is there is a cost to being able to upgrade the health, safety, and welfare of all the residents, and the good old days may be gone.
Well, that's going to be another policy decision, is how you transition in. But if the idea is for the development to be self-sustaining going forward, these are roughly the costs that you'll need to recoup per unit. And I think, Phyllis, you've done some comparisons down Valley. I don't know if I can put you on the spot here, but I think space rentals down Valley are going for about $600.
$670 is what
$670.
Crawford's charging for their mobile spaces. And the same thing, it's just a rental space. They own their units.
And have they filled all their spots, do you know?
They're,
There are new ones, yeah.
yeah.
So I think maybe to Kelly's concern, I think there's an ample demand out there. It's just a question of how much supply we want to provide.
Can I ask another question too, John, on infrastructure repayment? I don't remember us ever covering that as the county in any of our projects. It came back to the homeowners when we did the subdivision. Woody Creek, they ended up paying for their own infrastructure.
That's
Right.
correct, and that's why it was important for us to
Put that in there.
include this, is we feel, at least from a staff perspective, that's the most equitable position from what you've done in the past. Does not mean you're bound by that, but we wanted you to see, based on the fairness, basically,
Right.
with how we've managed these projects in the past, and what that cost estimate would be based on.
And
the
I
work
think
that's
that
been
would be
done.
key to looking at subdividing the property. It's kind of the direction I'm leaning towards at this point. I need to know more specifics about the co-op arrangement. But I think if we're talking housing security, it's great when you own it. You don't just own a room to sleep in, you own your land. And people take more investment in that when they live there and they own it. They tend to keep the upkeep, participate in neighborhood issues and stuff when it's truly their home.
But, the co-op model, everyone has ownership in it.
Right.
So if there's 50, you own 1/50 of the
Right,
whole
right.
thing.
That's a different, you have
and-
that other
and it'll
entity.
depend on what the lot lines look like.
Right.
Can you make it easy? If you leave them where they are, it's really hard to come up with
We
good-
worked that
so-
out at Lazy Glen, we worked that out at Woody Creek, we worked that out at Smuggler, we worked that out at Aspen Village, and we can probably just takes a little effort to try and look at lot sizes, and some of them fit, some of them don't.
Right, and then,
Okay.
yeah, what the spacing is
Yeah.
and what you have to do. Yeah, it's not easy, but
No.
it can be done.
It can be done.
We theoretically have 5 minutes left. We can probably run over because our applicant for our interview is not here yet. So if we could finish the presentation, and then we'll come back to final commissioner comments.
One note from
There he is.
the table here is, at 50 units, you're at about 60% of AMI, area median income, and that's a pretty tough market to hit to be able to provide units in that level. So if these numbers can hold, which, you know, there's a lot more detailed work to be done before you would call these anything close to final numbers, but they're internally consistent, so it's fair. And what we're looking for today is, so John has highlighted between 40 and 60, and when we go into site planning, that's what we would take into that site planning. And if you have any 40 or 50 or 60 that you want to land on, tell us now, otherwise we're going to be in that range when you start to see site plans.
And we can just go through these last slides pretty quickly. So really, it's just talking about the next steps. So that we've kind of completed the scope of Phase 1, and now we'd be moving into Phase 2, looking at a preliminary master plan, and continuing to integrate findings from the health impact assessment into that. Of course, continued outreach to the residents and non-residents, starting to share some of this financial information with them. As Bob mentioned earlier, starting to think about different ways to organize the neighborhood so that they can participate in the planning process, coordinating with other agencies, looking at those very important considerations, both from a planning and a policy perspective, with regard to how to make the transitions occur, looking at grant funding. There may be grant funding for assistance with even things on the infrastructure side, like the wastewater treatment facility. And then sharing the APSHA guideline information at a deeper level with the residents so they can become more familiar with what that process is going to look like.
And that's an important point. We did not assume any grant revenues or offsets, so all that would
We might
bring
be able
those
to
numbers
pursue
down.
some, yeah.
There's another layer of technical planning that will come. We'll continue to refine cost estimating as we go along. There's debris flow mitigation that we need to look at. We'd like to do a further assessment of the existing units to understand what's there and what the implications are for the existing units kind of moving forward, and continuing to explore renewables so that that could be integrated into any future planning efforts. As Phyllis mentioned, some things that might be considerations for moving forward with even this summer would be looking at some fire mitigation so that we're creating defensible space behind the hillside units, cleaning out some of the outbuildings and areas of trash and storage facilities that aren't being used, and that would just help to kind of improve the quality of the site. Replacing some of the pre-HUD units, and then ongoing resident communication. And that's really what we wanted to present today.
Steve, can I just real quick?
Okay,
Steve, can I real quick?
yeah, we need to give opportunity for all of us to have comments, and
So I just really quick, I think I've given my comments, except for one thing. I think it's critical, we still don't know who lives there and how and why. we still are wondering how many residents live there full-time, how many own the place and rent it out, and how many are full-time workers. And I know that some of the residents are a little hesitant. You can understand that there's a lot going on in their lives, and now we're throwing more at them. But I think it's critical that we have that information, so we know who we're talking to and what we're talking to them about. So I'd like to see that finalized. I think that's important. And then I think the rest of the details, I think I've given you the information on where I want to go as far as numbers and opportunities for a diverse population and type of housing.
I would say just on a broad brush, when people talk about rentals, there are only a couple that are true rentals, but there are people renting out if they have an extra bedroom.
That's different than renting out your whole place, but we need to know that. And where else they live, they don't live here full-time.
Okay, George or Kelly, do you want to, any more comments?
Well, I would, similar to what I said last time, we've got about 40 units there currently. I'm looking at, knowing that we're going to have to displace some people, relocate some people is a better term. Looking at spacing as well. I'm looking at probably 50 as sort of a max number in there.
Thank you. So again, for me, coming back to the home security question, it's going to be really important, I think, for me to understand how the residents would react to what a monthly fixed cost would be. Because, I'd like for this project to prioritize the residents who live there now and their ability to continue living there for their foreseeable futures, whether that is short or long term. And I understand that is going to come with a balance of, that may mean they decide they want the maximum number of units possible in that space to help lower their assumed monthly cost. And we are going to have to, I think, balance that against some other of these three priorities that John mentioned before. I appreciate Patty's comment that prior boards have indicated that where affordable housing exists would be appropriate for continued and perhaps denser affordable housing, and so this would fit that. We may, again, need to revisit that as a board if we want to further that or open that conversation, but I'm comfortable with that as it applies to this specific project. So I'm not ready to land on kind of a 50 number that George is. I think maybe that's going to be too low, honestly. And that there's opportunity to both balance, I think, the security of the people who live there with the opportunity for expanded use. I would like to do a site visit if we can arrange that, to just better understand if I can give clearer direction on whether a stick bill is appropriate or not, because right now I don't want to say yes, sure, so we can get the most in there if it's really not an appropriate site. So I hope that gives you some direction. I don't think that was the clearest.
Well, one point of clarification, if I take the 50 and John's calculation and round it to $1,200 a month, if someone already owns their unit, they would not be paying the $500 for a new modular, and so then I would be at, let's say, $700 a month. I'm currently paying $350, but I don't have any ownership, and in this scenario, I'm gaining an ownership stake. So I feel comfortable going back and talking to residents about the distinction of here's a $350 position and here's a $700 position, and getting their feedback on that for those who already own a unit that's not going to have to be relocated.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, and then I've got several ideas. First of all, on the general numbers, I'm willing to look at any of these numbers on the chart. And I think we need to, number one, we need to talk to the residents and show them the whole plan and get their feedback on what would these different phases of development look like and feel like to them for affordability and livability of the whole community. So our site visit and the feedback from the residents, I think, are really important. looking at when we have to move current residents to a new location, either from the Riverview side or the units that are too close together and need to get more separation, I would try to give them priority on picking the site that they want to move to. And I would really listen to them on these different proposals for different areas where we could potentially build something. Ask each of those people what, if you had your choice, where would you want to have a unit? Because I think that could help us to make our decisions. Looking at the tiny home question, I think where tiny homes work the best is where there's actually a community center where the people who live in the tiny homes have a community building where they can go to do their laundry, to sprawl out on a sofa and watch TV with all their friends. So they need another bigger space they can go to and not just always be in their tiny homes. So if we're going to do the tiny home part, we need also to plan a kind of a community building somewhere on the property. I noticed that a lot of the units in the different proposed areas are on irrigated land, which I would try to put it up above the cerise ditch and not on the irrigated land as a first option. That's just one more consideration, that if we want to have some community garden space or whatever, we need to plan that in too. And let's see, the Riverview Park, I'd like to toss out an idea that hasn't been mentioned, but that could be a park for the residents of the mobile home park. They could access it across the pedestrian bridge. That could be their place to go down to the river and recreate there and not have people pulling off the highway to go in there. Just block those roads off completely, make it a resident park, Riverside Park for the residents there. I think that would help alleviate a lot of the angst of people who are losing their homes, and they love that side of the river, and if we make it a park for them to go back and have picnics and group things and go fishing there and whatever and access it over the pedestrian bridge, I think that would go a long way to helping people accept that. And then last of all, somewhere on this chart, I think there's an optimum number that we need to try to settle on in terms of weighing all the different things and seeing what works economically. It's going to be hard to find that exact number. I tend to think it's going to be a little bit on the upper side. So Kelly mentioned it's probably going to be more in the 60 range, and that's kind of what I think I always envisioned ever since before we decided to purchase the property, that the only way to make it work, we're going to need to put more units in there to make it more economically feasible. And so that's the end of my comments, and I'll look forward to number one, the site visit, when the weather and the mud and all that allows at some point. And look forward to further discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And just for what we plan to do this summer, then working on the fire mitigation, cleaning out the buildings, you're all okay with us just
I have a question real quick. Have we brought in both Aspen and Basalt? I don't know, is it in the Basalt Fire District?
Basalt?
Are they willing to help us out? They
Yes.
do such great mitigation programs. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
I've already
perfect.
contacted them about getting an evaluation. The same, that we need the weather to be a little bit
Yeah, and I'm sure that
better.
they will be more than willing to help with actual boots on the ground
Yeah.
assistance. Okay. And if you need
as-
any help with that, let us
as
know.
well as the possibility of chipping and doing that kind of a program.
Yeah. Yeah,
And Hiram's on board. He couldn't make it here today.
okay, great.
but yeah.
Thank you.
He's aware of everything that we're.
And demolition of outbuildings, I think we need to be careful because most of those are for people's storage. We don't want them,
No, this is Phillips property storage.
I
This
was
is
gonna say not the
family
individual
storage.
units. Okay,
No,
just
no, no, this is
clarification.
the shed and the. ooh,
Not
The
clarification.
old equipment.
It's pretty clear
Where
there.
farmers put every piece of equipment that broke because you never knew if you needed the
A part.
part somewhere down the line.
Okay, I just wanted clarification
Yeah,
of that.
no.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have an interview for Planning and Zoning Board, and that's Zach Matthews, a former illustrious grassroots person.
There you go.
Thank you. Hey, how's it going? Good to see you.
So Zach, thanks for coming in today to
No
be
problem.
interviewed.
Good to see you guys.
Most of our boards, we don't ask the people renewing to come in for another interview. But for the Planning and Zoning Board, the Open Space and Trails Board,
Yep,
we do because they're such important positions.
absolutely.
So, could you tell us, first of all, I don't know, putting it bluntly, why do you want to re-up on the Planning and Zoning Board?
Well, I think we've been doing a lot of good work and have been putting in a lot of time, especially we just worked through the rent fee issue, which was pretty interesting, as well as the Pandora lift expansion. And I've just been enjoying the work, and I think there's a lot of, a lot more needs to be done.
Okay?
So Steve,
Yeah.
I really appreciated your comments about having more time to maybe run through questions with staff. I used to do that on a very frequent basis,
Yeah.
especially at the beginning and especially when big issues came up. So I'm sure we can find a way for Cindy and her office to accommodate more time for P and Z members to ask questions, or either, be emails or
Yeah.
whatever. Because it's important. You like to be able to be more efficient during your meeting time. So I appreciate that. And you have had big issues before you, and I know the P&Z board has worked really well together and is currently working well together, and I'm glad that you're reapplying.
Great, thank you very much.
George?
Hi, Zach.
Hey, George.
Remind me, what else are you doing these days?
I have a property management business, and I have a snow removal business that I'm the owner operator of for about 10 years now. So
Okay. And as you're well aware, ComDev has been looking at, from our direction, in terms of ways we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, knowing that about 70% of our built environment contributes to that. So we're looking at lots of different ways to do that, from upgrading our energy building codes to looking at the TDR programs, homes sizes, land use impacts. Just sort of philosophically, I'm just trying to get an idea in terms of where you're at in terms of trying to lower our footprint in utilizing some of these tools that we may have.
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been interesting, especially when we went through the possibility of restructuring the rent fee issues on the property I do property management, so I get to see a lot of these large homes firsthand and deal with the energy usage that actually happens. So when we got to look through the study and go through the amount of energy that these large homes were using and how we can help as a county mitigate that and how we wanted to approach that situation, I'd seen it from the other end. So I felt like I had a unique perspective on it. And one of the things that came up that was interesting was adapting and we brought this up in the P&Z board, adapting the building envelope issue, because a lot of the solar panels that are built on these large second homes are sort of put up as an afterthought, and most of the time they're not put up with the appropriate exposure that they need to be, like a nice southerly exposure where you maximize the amount of energy that's created to mitigate the amount of greenhouse gas and energy that's used in the homes. And I was working on a project that's actually over in Delta County, where the solar panels were the array, based on different zoning and different issues, but right now, the way that we're talking about it is if you adapt the building envelope and you allow people to put the solar array separate from the house and not on the roof. There are systems now where you can put the solar array on a hydraulic tilt pole where it can follow the track of the sun the whole entire way, and it also makes it a lot easier especially when we get a winter like this. All these snow panels right now are covered in a couple feet of snow, so it makes issues like cleaning snow off the solar panels and the amount of energy that they can create, it's a lot more functional. And so that was one of the recommendations that we had added in for you guys to look at, was the ability to adapt the building envelope so that in these houses, if people are going to put solar panels up, they can put them in an area that's separate from the house, hoping, that it does reduce the amount of impact as much as you can, but it actually makes it a lot more functional. And so, that was one of the things we came up with in the, when we were working through that situation.
So do you see because you see large homes and the amount of energy they use, even if you were able to utilize some of that building envelopes, depending on where those homes are located, some could take advantage, but some can't.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts in terms of home sizes? Should we look at lowering them? And also, what are your thoughts about looking down the road in terms of striving for net zero building codes?
Yeah. First, for the max home size, and I know that you guys have been talking about this as well, bringing that max 15,000 foot home size down to 1270 or something like that. It's interesting because one of the things that I had commented on when we were talking about that was tiering the system and tiering the fees. So as the larger the home size goes up, the REMP fees are tiered up sort of to when they hit a 15,000 square foot home, you hit sort of a max fee system. And one of the things that I thought was that we definitely probably need to watch out for is that lower home size, that 57, 6,000 square foot home. I didn't think that it was in the county's best interest or in P&Z's best interest to have that homeowner pay the same, fee rate as someone with a 12, 15,000 square foot home. That there might be a lot of, or there might be some people that are, locals, small families, that are building a 6,000 square foot home or, up the Crystal or somewhere, that they might be really negatively impacted by that fee rate. But I think that bringing that max home size down would definitely be an effective way of dealing with some of the greenhouse gas and energy use issues. I guess the thing that I think you have to watch out for is if the fee rate is structured, that's where a large amount of your income is going to come from that top rate of home size. And the net zero building code, it's right now, the way that the building technology has come along, that it can be executed even at homes of that size. It's just giving them the tools that they need to do it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And thank you for reapplying.
Yep.
Has there been a project for you that stands out as one that's been particularly frustrating approval?
Nothing's been too frustrating. The Pandora's ski expansion was a little sort of in a quandary about that one because I've spent a lot of time over the years skiing back there myself, and so it's kind of like if you have your favorite fishing hole, and then someone's going to build a road to it. You're not sure. It's good. It's great news and not so great news, you know. And so that was tough because I have spent a lot of time skiing on the back. My family used to own a property on the backside of Aspen Mountain, so I've spent a lot of time over the years back there and enjoying that whole area. So it was you know, it's like giving up your secret spot kind of a deal. So that one was tough.
And then another question I have, so a little bit back to the conversation you were just responding to George's question. You know, there's some philosophical discussions about, you know, should Pitkin County just have a very simple code that's focused on kind of outcome measures and goals, and then, you know, within that, if you can show you're reaching those targets, that you know, designers have more latitude, or you know, do you kind of have a personal preference for the prescriptive type of code that we have currently?
Yeah, I prefer the more prescriptive style of code right now because I feel like it gives the county a better way to articulate exactly what it wants to do, situation by situation.
Okay, great, thank you, appreciate that.
Well, Zach, looking through your answers, you know, you have very thoughtful answers, and you bring up some big issues, and one which we haven't talked about today is the TDR system. So you have thoughts on modernizing the antiquated TDR system. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I know you guys have been talking about this for a long time, and I feel like it's a great, you know, it's an amazing system, and the amount of property and the amount of open space that the system has created over the years is amazing. And if you went through a list of all the building sites, you know, that have been saved in Lanedo or on the backside of Aspen Mountain, and all that it's been created has been extremely effective, and it's the only system like it. So we can't really look to other counties for advice on how to modernize it and how to change it. And so it's definitely going to be interesting. I do think that I would like for all of us to look at the idea of a half TDR or a quarter TDR. And I know I know that it's extremely technical, but I'm sure the amount of sites that you guys have seen, especially constrained sites, and or the amount of, put it this way, I bet there's a lot of lots that you guys that would have come across the BOCC board that did not fall directly under could not be categorized as earning one TDR, but that could have earned a half a TDR that still could have been conserved. And so that's something that I think would be interesting to look at. I have no idea how that affects the system. And like I said, it's the only thing like it. So how does that affect the market? And, you know, the people who already have TDRs, how does that affect their TDR? Are they able to split it and sell a half a TDR? And, you know, it's the only system like it. So we can't look to anyone for advice. But that was sort of a thought, you know, if there's a mining claim in Lanedo and it doesn't fit the max amount of acreage, or doesn't have the right qualifications for a constrained site, but it still would be great to conserve that. How do you go about that? And is there a way to work that out? It's definitely something to take a look at.
It's interesting you mentioned the half TDR idea, because maybe I mentioned that when you were in
Yeah, for sure.
in the back, but I always thought that would be a way, since people tend to build right up to the whatever they're allowed.
Yeah.
If they get one TDR per 2,500 square feet, chances are they're going to somehow build right up to
Right to the edge.
8250
Yeah.
or whatever their number is. But maybe they don't want a place that big, and a half TDR would allow them to have a little bit smaller house, which is maybe what they wanted in the first place.
Yeah, without completely maximizing the square footage. And we also spoke in a P&Z meeting about using the TDR system for the rent fee stuff
Other issues.
and you know, the when they did the energy study for those large homes, the biggest killer is the pools, and the outdoor heated driveways are the largest energy use of anything. Is the outdoor pools, outdoor heated patios and driveways. And I know we talked about using the TDR system to mitigate for that in the future. So that's definitely something to look at as well.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming in today.
Thanks,
Board,
Zach.
do you have any more last minute questions?
No, I just appreciate your time.
Thank you for your guys' time.
Thanks for
Being in here on a nice sunny day. So
I don't
Thanks.
think you'll have any trouble with us reappointing you, Zach.
you never know. I run into
think
trouble
you're a
all
really
the time.
good
So. Good to see you guys. Thank
So you
you.
just decided for it. Okay, thanks, Zach.
Yeah, all right. Great. Thank you.
So, next on the agenda, we have future agendas. And, John, we had talked about possibly doing the homeless coalition talk right now, or do you want to do that
I can do that during open.
later?
Either
And is Joey
place.
in here for one
For-
certain topic?
For future agendas, actually, so
Okay.
maybe I'll just hit a couple quick ones first to make sure we get to them before we get to the last one. Just so the board is aware, in visiting with city staff, we're going to look at bringing APSHA guideline revisions back for your review and city council's review in April based on the agreements that were reached at your last joint meeting. That will leave some issues on the table still, but we felt like we should probably memorialize the agreements that are in place with the current council before they move on.
Our
So-
joint meeting is in May 7th.
Yeah, we're going to do it individually with council and with you. We basically redlined the IGA based
I
on
mean,
our
individually
last
with the
joint meeting.
city council and then individually with the BOCC, not individually.
Correct. Correct. Thank you, Patty. So we'll be getting those scheduled in April. We're waiting to hear back. City staff is reviewing our recommended red lines right now.
George?
So two things. So will we still have our May 2nd joint meeting with the
Yes.
city? I wonder if that's really going to be that productive because we'll be dealing with a lame duck council and the new council will take place early June. It seems like it may make more sense to have a joint meeting once the new council and mayor is seated.
We could definitely have that conversation if you guys
you
want to
guys-
switch
In
that.
addition to that, I agree with George on that. If we are to have it, we need to have work session time prior to know what we're going to even talk about.
Understood.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with George. I didn't even think of that.
The other thing is next Tuesday, Greg and Steve are out. Right now, I have a jury summons. I won't know about that until Sunday night or Monday, whether I'll
all
have
right,
jury
Kelly and I
duty
can
on
run it.
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday?
So we may not have a quorum. So we'll have to see.
Well, we can provide information and get no direction then.
No, you can get all the direction you've ever wanted because it'll be Kelly and I.
I have one too. I don't think it's next Tuesday, though, but that would be funny.
Well, my question for
Okay.
that day was
So
who was
we
going to
may not-
chair.
we
So
may
I
not
guess that's an
have-
issue we don't have to even talk about.
Well, we won't have we may have a quorum. Again, I'll know either Sunday night or Monday. And,
So we'll check with you on Monday, George.
yeah, okay, I'll let you know.
And then if we do have a quorum, we won't have a chair or a vice chair. So we'll have to decide who chairs.
Would you like to draw names out of a hat, or do you want to do a?
I'd like to see Kelly in the hot seat.
Well, she would be the next person. I think Kelly can handle it. It's just,
He actually would be,
I'm not afraid of you, George.
she would be.
I'm afraid of you.
I just wanted to give her some prep so she didn't go, what, when she got to the meeting. I'm trying to be nice.
Yeah, understood.
Kelly will be nice, we promise. So I can
Okay.
write that one off my list too.
So
yeah, next week, speaking of next week, I know that Chad Federvich is going to be presenting on the revised aging well plan, and I'm really sorry to not have a full board here to hear that.
Well, if
Next week, we might not even
Need
have
to
a board.
watch it on the video to get his report. on it.
yeah, if we don't have a quorum, we may want to move some of those reports out to May or April, wherever we can find time slots. Just real quick, APSHA guideline changes on hearing officer and fines. We have not scheduled those to come back. We're still waiting to see when the APSHA board is going to have their first and second readings on them. So more to come on that.
I think at their last meeting, in their future agenda discussion, they said the 3rd and then the 11th.
3rd and 11th of April. Okay. So we'll look at that after they adopt. So it'll probably be the last work. Yeah, may go out till May, regular meeting.
So Steve, I have a few more things, but I'd like to let Joey go since he's.
Yeah.
patiently sitting
I'm
here.
getting to that. Just real quick, EOTC retreat, please respond to David's doodle poll, which
haven't
is what you
received
guys
it.
agreed to.
Did it come in yet?
Should have
Yeah,
come
it
in
was
yet.
just in
Yeah.
today's-
So if you
Oh,
haven't,
it's just
well,
today? I
yeah.
haven't been on,
Yeah, it's
Okay, so just wanted to get through some of that. The reason Joe's here is we want to set up a work session. We're targeting right now May 7th, and it's really related to Senate Bill 19-019, which is county firework restrictions. The county has the ability by ordinance to issue fire ban and fireworks restrictions, in particular the fireworks restrictions, particularly between May 31st and July 5th, are based on competent evidence of fire danger. This legislation gives a little bit more flexibility for the board to issue that fire restriction and fireworks restriction ahead of time. I'll let Joe, speak to.
It's either one.
I'll let Joe, kind of speak to what he's seeing, but what we'd like to do is have a work session, that first work session in May, to go over the legislation and options and potentially consider adopting a fire ban earlier than we have in the past, including a fireworks ban and the standards under which it would be actually implemented or not between May 31st and July 5th, just to give all the entities who may be planning for displays and such during that time a heads up if the board were willing to do that.
But per Joey's discussion, he brought up at ACRA meeting today, it's a little more than just that.
Yeah,
It would be for the full year. There's a window
I'm
between May
going to get
31st
to that,
and July
and
5th.
thank you.
But
And
Joe, I'll turn it
John,
over
you can
to
call me Joey whenever you want.
Okay.
For all of you except maybe Kelly, you're not unfamiliar with my radical ideas. So I had a radical idea this early winter about on the heels of last summer and the Lake Christine fire and how that fire got started. I thought that and it's not an unpatriotic statement. I thought that why do we have fireworks at all? Even under some of the best conditions, they are a threat. I narrowed down this one. As Patty said, I spoke to ACRA this morning and had a conversation with the Basalt emergency managers down there who do the Roaring Fork Club display. Oregon, Washington, Colorado, California, New Mexico, red hot states, dry climate, high altitude, lightning. We have the majority of the wildfires in the United States. So with our history at Pickens County of being a little innovative, I thought, why do we have fireworks at all, whether they are private or public displays in summer months? Winter skull fireworks, I don't think I have a problem with. But I think fireworks between May and the 1st of November, is that really responsible for us in a red hot state? So I kind of thought originally I would come to you and ask you to consider a countywide ban on all fireworks. I do have permits that come through ComDev and my office for private displays that frankly are as big as what we see on Aspen Mountain. Some in Old Snowmass, some east of town, and these are, $10,000, $15,000 displays. And I really was wondering, is it fair to limit those private displays and not a public display? So that's when I thought, why don't we just ban all of it? And for those hot months and, protect ourselves. I think last year threw a scare into all of us. It did me. It showed us how quickly a fire could blow up. On that Saturday night at 9 o'clock at night, the winds changed, and we saw a virtual explosion of fire. And even though a small fire may seem containable with the right wind and the right temperatures, it could blow up real fast. John Peacock brought up an interesting point this morning that, no one should be fooled by wet weather or a lot of snow. In fact, that may even create more of a problem of growth. So we're going to have an undergrowth that may start in April or May. By July, we're really dry. We actually have more fuel than we would have had in a drier winter. So that was my original idea, was to come to this board and ask, why aren't we just banning fireworks altogether in Pitkin County? The public displays would be allowed within municipalities. If the city of Aspen wanted to have one at the golf course or Wagner Park, that's permissible. I don't think they're near as dangerous there either. And, golf course, which we've had a few times, and when we've had fire bans, it's well irrigated, it's flat, not a lot of dry stuff out there, and any fire is easily contained. So from that, it morphed into let's just not have fireworks at all. So that's the beginning of the discussion. Senate Bill 1919 is the one that is now telling us that 30 days before, and I think it should be in your packets. I think we sent it to you ahead. May give me 30 days before to make that decision. We go into a fire ban June 1st with supporting evidence, and the supporting evidence is usually ERC, energy release control. And that is, when we get in the 89, 90 range, we get worried or nervous, or energy release component, I'm sorry. Now the state is actually mandating that when you're around 80, you may go into a fire ban
And that
or
means
restriction.
what the soil moisture is, the growth moisture is, the undergrowth moisture
Right.
is.
It's
Combination of fire
how
signs.
much moisture is in a twig,
Yeah.
for lack of
blade
a
of grass.
better explanation. So those are the two positions or options I would propose. I'm not against a total fireworks ban. I think there's so many alternatives in the forms of laser shows. They've got these things now where they put a bunch of vapor up and they project lasers on it. It's crazy. It's awesome. But I think we got to do as much as we can to protect our environment and community in rural areas. I could see George is poised.
Poised? No, I think it's a good idea. It's interesting. I believe that Breckenridge and Frisco, the municipalities, have instituted a fire ban year-round for those similar concerns. I mean, when we look at climate change and the increase in fires, when you look at California, the last 3-4 years, they've had more damage, more acreage burned than probably in the last 20-30 years. And there's no longer just a fire season. It's year-round. And then there's other implications, but it's tremendous loss of life and property. And I think, your point's taken. There are, if you look at Disneyland, Disney World, they do laser shows every night to thousands and thousands of people with music, and everyone has a great time. So I would be supportive of that concept. If we have a meeting to discuss this, it seems like we would want to invite representatives from the Forest Service and BLM here, because although we don't have jurisdiction over public lands, it would be good to see whether they would be on the same page as us. There's an enforcement issue, but I know there are fireworks that take place in the backcountry on public lands that are really creating a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, George, we have a really, really good relationship with our local Forest Service and BLM. And a few years ago, we all decided that the best message for the public is consistency. So I think they'd really like this idea. Of all people who don't want to see the forest get burned would be the U.S. Forest Service. But we are usually on the same page, a consistent message. Sometimes we have some players that are not as consistent, and we do whatever we can to make that message palatable for the public. But I think a countywide, I think what we're talking about is a countywide ban, whether it's Forest Service, Fire District, whatever, would be all covered under your purview. It's kind of already designated that by state law to me as the fire warden. As I often say, and I said it this morning, in 1876, I think there was a bunch of things left on the table after they assigned people and said, there's fire warden left over, the sheriff stayed, give it to him. I got this through some strange twist
Well,
of
I think as
fate.
part of today's discussion in Accra, it was first, everybody was jumped on it, and then they started thinking about the marketing ability of fireworks at 4th of July, and people come here for that. And my thing was, let's be creative, let's defy ordinary, which is Accra's mantra, and say, let's create a different form of fireworks that aren't fire. But I think that we should make sure that Accra is aware of this meeting and that they bring their comments in. And they're hopefully they're going to be thinking about it between now and whenever we have this meeting. I think that's important. I'd also like to see exactly what Frisco and Breckenridge did. I think they just did a ban for this 4th of July. Breckenridge banned the fireworks display this 4th of July. Frisco joined it because they were afraid everybody would come to Frisco and they didn't know how they'd be able to handle the traffic and all that from that many people in their jurisdiction.
It has to be redone annually.
Frisco's and Breckenridge's.
Any jurisdictions in the state. And so we'll bring that. That's why we wanted to do a work session, and we think that May 7th will give us time to have that conversation.
Get
We could
something in
bring
line.
back something, depending on the direction of the board and advice of the sheriff, by May 22nd, which would be ahead of the
We
June
could do an
timeline.
emergency ordinance of some form if
Yep.
we needed to get it in. But I think we need to make sure that the public is aware of this, because there are people in this community who would support no fireworks ever, and people who want fireworks all the time. We have that.
Yeah, and that's why we thought, one, having this discussion during future agendas, so that I see Jason taking copious notes there, so hopefully it'll be noted that we're going to have a future work session and public meetings on it, and we'll do those work sessions.
And
public
Carolyn was at our
meetings ahead
meeting
of time.
this morning too at Accra.
And as I said almost repetitively this morning, I think part of who we are as a community and a county is people who do things innovative and outside the box that might not be immediately accepted, but most of the times we're pretty much ahead of what everyone else eventually does. And I could see this state maybe at one time in certain areas banning fireworks. I mean, well,
At least the
it's such
sale
a,
of them,
like I
that's
said this morning, it's a really bad analogy, but we're playing with fire. We're tempting, another big fire. The tracer round isn't much different than a firework. It just moves a lot faster through the air.
And I look forward to the conversation. Just to reiterate your concern, I was at a Colorado Basin Roundtable meeting yesterday, and that group still has vast concerns about the soil moisture content, despite the winter snows that we've received.
Yeah.
So, there is no guarantee that because of this strong winter and strong snowpack we have now, that we're not going to run into some real fire concerns quickly this summer.
In 4 to 5 weeks, everything changes so quickly.
If not sooner.
Yeah, and Joe, you mentioned don't be fooled by all the snow. In California, oftentimes their worst fire seasons are after a real rainy winter, because the grass grows this tall everywhere on all those hills, and then it dries out in the summer, and then that's just, they have huge grass fires that get into the brush and burn 100,000 acres pretty quickly.
Very.
Yeah. Okay, definitely, I think this is a good topic for a work session. And
So, John,
we got
when
a
should I
little
put you on?
preview of it
Did we say the
today.
22nd?
We're going to look at May 7th
Okay.
for the work session. that'd give us some time if we need to do follow-up with the board or the community and tee us up for an adoption on May 22nd, if that's the.
Let's make sure we notify ACRA about that too.
Yeah, and if you want to invite the Roaring Fork Club, or I talked to the people in Basalt, they were very easily persuaded.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah,
Joe.
it should be noted, I mean, ACRA deals with the town of Aspen, basically, and so the municipality can join in or not join in. We're looking at a county ban,
No,
which
the
is a
issue
little bit
is the
different.
fireworks that ACRA puts on are in the county for Fourth
Yeah.
of July.
On the mountain, thank you.
And so, but you're right, George, anything we do would not apply within the
Right.
municipal boundaries.
right.
But
Yeah.
that, we need to know
George,
where that
about-
boundary is, where the city takes
Yeah.
over on Aspen Mountain.
It's about 200 yards up the mountain is the city-county line.
Okay, thank you.
So they might be able to move them down and still be in the city.
That is a possibility.
I
That's
asked
their problem.
I asked Debbie to look into that.
And just so you know, and Patty will probably remember better, this morning at the ACRA meeting, somebody asked in the last 10 years how many fireworks displays got canceled, and they thought it was 4 or 5.
3 to 4.
3 to 4. So we're seeing more than we have in the first 30
It's upping,
years
and
of
those
my
have been more
career.
recent years than
So,
past in the town.
any more questions?
Thanks, Joy.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
And are there, John, is that it for future?
No, I
business?
didn't get to mine. I postponed mine so Joey could speak.
Okay,
Yeah, George peeked on my list and took some of mine. So, John, on the 10th of April, we put on the photovoltaic issue for the ambulance building on consent. And my understanding is that we put it, I think that's a broader discussion, but we are having a work session on that prior to.
Yeah.
So do you think we'll be able to, or should consent, because there's been a lot of community concern. I just want to raise that issue.
Yeah, and we've had conversations with the
Homeowners up there?
Yeah, and the bigger concerns that we heard were they thought the elevator shaft was a fenestration for mechanicals on top of the building, and once we got through that and we talked about solar, everyone's like, oh yeah, that's
I just
yeah.
want to make sure we weren't.
Yeah, and that issue has more to do with the planning process with the city that the board they had requested a resolution of the board, under locations and extent. Once you guys pass that resolution authorizing it, it's a final decision.
Okay. And then also on April the 10th, we have, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but we have 2 items under individual consent items first reading, also listed under public hearing second reading. We have the ordinance of accepting the public trail easement for Crystal Basin is also under, it's number 5, and it's issue number 7. And Kara's issue about the intergovernmental agreement with the city for broadband is also listed as item number 4,
Yeah,
number 8.
we'll get that
Just 'cause
corrected.
we
I
don't
don't
want-
think that's going to meet noticing requirements.
I just
so
want to
thank
make
you.
sure that
Yeah.
we are. And then on the 24th of April, we have under land use public hearings, we have the first, item number 7 is the ski area rezoning, second reading. And then we have the second issue for the ski company is listed as item number 9 with the Harvey Steamboat Partnership issue in between. That doesn't make any
And
sense.
we made a note to,
Okay, and then can we put those at the end of the day, both the ski company issues, because I will be recusing? Just makes better sense. Cindy, you got that? If not, if you forget, let me know. All right, and then George answered the rest of mine, so I guess I'm done, George. I'm done.
thanks, Patty.
okay. Anybody else have anything? Let's take a 5-minute break. Is that enough for everybody?
7 minute.
7-minute
Trevor,
break,
how about 8.5?
and then we'll come back and we'll,
5 minutes, fine.
And Steve, I'm going to be John Kinney today
okay.
with a less impressive voice.
In case you're just joining us, that today is March 26th, Tuesday, Board of County Commissioners Work Session. And we are next going to have an Aspen-Picken County Airport Visioning Team update by our stand-in for John Kinney.
Yeah, I apologize. You're missing the radio voice today, but we just wanted to spend a few minutes giving you an update. We had another vision committee, not visioning, really ASC Vision work group meeting on March 20th, and so just wanted to run through that. I know a number of you got to be there, some of you didn't. The purpose of the meeting was to clarify the purpose, roles, and responsibilities of the advisory groups. That was largely done actually not by staff or the consultants, but by the leadership from the visioning committee. So John Bennett, Meg Haynes, and Jackie Francis all spent a little bit of time talking about the process itself, talking about the work groups, and talking about the roles. We then I'll go over the agenda here in a second, but the second purpose was to better understand the role of the FAA and what airport elements are locally controlled and which are preempted by the federal government. And then just explore and understand the potential implications of where we're preempted or where we're not to the decision-making process that we're in. The full agenda we didn't get to. We got to the welcome and introductions, the going deeper with the Airport Vision Committee, what to expect from the FAA, an airport compliance overview. We got to the panel discussion, and we made a decision with the Vision Committee leadership that is really important to try and exhaust all the questions that we could from the community while we had expertise available from the FAA, so we never got to our breakout group discussions. We're going to be scheduling those in April. They're working on dates right now. We'll probably do those at CMC so we can gather everyone and have some breakout rooms to follow up on this meeting. So we are going to continue to honor that, and there's a reason that we had spacing between months was exactly for this. We talked a little bit about the February 21st meeting, which was really getting organized. I think the interesting thing that came out of that is we did a survey. Folks could log on to it from their cell phones or fill it out on paper. This is a little bit hard to read, but in terms of the priorities of the folks from the 21st, safety of aircraft operations was by far and away number one. Reliability of air service was number two. The quality of the air service experience was number three. And then right behind those and really tied was maintaining existing air service and noise and air quality impacts. So it gave us some ideas, at least where the group was at coming in to these conversations, and it gives us a way to structure conversations around those concerns. In terms of talking about the FAA, we did bring in Greg Walden. He's currently doing consulting work. I think most relevant to this conversation is he is a past chief counsel of the FAA and teaches aviation law and transportation law. And so he spent quite a bit of time talking to the community about different preemption issues. I'm not going to go through everything he talked about, but I am going to, at the end of the presentation, tell you where you can go to watch it for yourself.
I found out from Pat Bingham today. She just sent me the
Oh, good.
link.
But some conclusions that he really drew was that basically there's a decision tree. You know, your first decision or the community's first decision is, you know, do we do anything with the airfield? or don't we? And if we do nothing, we basically stay as a non-standard airport design group 3. He listed some potential actions or consequences that may result if this process results in that decision. And then he talked about the other option really on the table with the FAA was to upgrade to the Airport Design Group 3 standards and some of what that means. But I think importantly, he pointed out that if you do decide to go to the Airport Design Group 3 standards, then really there's still a lot of decisions to make, and there's a lot of local control over the overall size of the airport, the capacity, particularly as it relates to commercial air traffic based on the number of gates that are built, the size and number of gates, the terminal passenger space, and he talked a lot about the local market constraints and how those would be a natural kind of limit on growth. And so really kind of teased apart that there's still a lot of conversation that the community needs to have about how the airport fits into the community's future vision of itself and how much growth do we want to accommodate or not accommodate at the airport. And so he talked quite a bit about the levers that can be pulled and those that are basically preempted by the federal government. We then went into a panel discussion where we had Greg Walden, Mike Herman, who's our program manager from Kimley Horn, John Kinney, and myself, basically answering questions. And that went on, I would say, for almost 2 hours. I was shocked, quite frankly, that we had that many people stay in the room for that long, which was roughly 3 hours, to talk about federal preemption at an airport. It was a good session. I think we did do a good job of exhausting the questions that were on the table, and gave some information for the committees in terms of what their or what our discretion is as a community and what it's not. So that was kind of a summary of what happened on the 20th. For anyone that wants further information or wants to see any of it, I have not gone out to this website in a little bit here, but oh boy, I don't know why I'm featured on this, but asevision.com. Oh, it's not showing, is it?
Maybe you have a pop-up blast.
It's showing on my screen.
What more is supposed to be up there?
Huh. I popped out to the website.
Oh,
So
I went to the website and the county site over the weekend and couldn't find it, but Pat said
it just went up today.
just went up this
So I
afternoon.
apologize. I cannot figure out how to get to Explorer, apparently. At any rate, asevision.com has all of the materials that we've presented at our first 2 meetings. The video for the second meeting has just gone up, so you can watch the first and second meetings. They're robust videos. They're roughly about 3 hours apiece. We have had 91 hits on the first video, which was surprising to me. The video of last week's meeting just went up today.
Interesting.
And so, anyone that wants to go out and view what Greg Walden said or the panel discussion and how those questions were, or in some cases we didn't have the answers to questions, weren't answered. Those are all available. We'll also be posting written answers to questions that we've received in the future. So, and I apologize, I can't seem to pull that up for you guys. Oh, there it is. So asevision.com, that's the video. You click on that, you can watch all of it. You can get additional project information, including all the materials and videos from the 21st. So we're going to keep updating this as we go forward. Any questions?
What's the name of our DOLA contact? Isn't it Greg Walden?
No,
What?
Winkler.
Oh, Winkler. I'm like,
Greg
God, where's
Winkler.
Greg Walden? Sounds so familiar.
So
I'm like, wow, WW.
just a last thing is to remind you of our, I know we called this a roadmap, but I'm going to keep calling it a flight path. I think that makes more sense.
Jeez, John.
I know. So we started on February 21st with our kickoff and kind of getting initial thoughts from the community. March 20th, we had a discussion about federal preemption and FAA requirements. In between, April, we're going to be getting the work groups back together to start doing, really starting to dig into some of the conversations that they need to have about where, how are they coming into this process in terms of what needs to happen at our airport for the next 30 years, what shouldn't happen at our airport for the next 30 years, and how can we fit that in with what we're required to do by the FAA. May 7th, we'll be bringing information, doing more education all together on trends in airspace and the air service industry. So we'll be bringing updated information about what's happening with aircraft and technology, air service, airline decision making, so on and so forth. We're anticipating between May and July, so in June, that we'll probably have some more breakout kind of work group meetings happening at that time. Then in July, we'll be bringing some additional information to the group. We have Gabe Preston working with Kimley Horn to do some build-out analysis and really try and get our hands around what's happening in the community. What does build-out look like? What does growth look like? How does that relate to the airport, if at all? And really start from there. That will be the information that we'll be asking the groups to start to work with to start to brainstorm that vision and options and information that we'll use to bring back different airport layout plans, what we think they mean for commercial capacity in the future, GA capacity, airport operations, and try and hone those through September and October, finally refining them with what we can do informs what we should do, which is the financing side, and then back to you in November and December. So we are on track, and we'll keep you posted throughout the process.
Great.
Real quick question, is there a way, or do people sign in when they come to these meetings so you can keep track of attendance and how many total were there?
Absolutely, and I unfortunately don't have that information in front of me today, but we do have that for each meeting. I will say I think the attendance at our last meeting was significantly less. Primarily, it was focus group members that weren't able to attend. We're going back and looking at why that might be. Is it the timing of the meetings? I think we had some issues with the email system that we were using to send out. They're using something called MailChimp, and apparently some folks have filters for spam that we're getting caught up in it. So we're looking at how we can set up a different email chain for everyone. So we're trying to diagnose why we lost some of those folks. The vision committee attendance was very good, I know that. So next time we give an update, I'll try and have those numbers for you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John.
Yep.
Next up, we have Kara giving us a legislative update. So Kara, could you please come up to the hot seat?
Who's updating who? Carousel Bernagel in the manager's office. So just a couple requests I wanted to just circle back with everyone and then open it up to others that might have work for us to do. But CC4CA had reached out. I'm not sure if you've heard, but House Bill 191261 is the climate action plan to reduce pollution. It's the big climate bill that's been introduced. CC4CA had reached out to, I don't know if it was to all commissioners or just a couple, but is requesting essentially a sign-on. It's not a letter, but they're creating a broad coalition group to sign on and support this bill. At the same time, CORE reached out and was curious if the county was going to support the bill. So I was able to have a brief conversation with Mona and get her insights. And in short, are you guys aware of what the bill is? Is everyone aware of it?
Maybe
I can give a brief
give a
summary.
brief overview.
So,
I've been getting a ton of stuff from CCAT that's like confusing me.
likewise.
Well, all these different bills and other things, and it's like, so which one are we focusing on?
So this is the climate bill, and what it does is it seeks to reduce carbon pollution in the state to 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050 compared to 2005 levels, and that it will actually be implemented and regulated through the Air Quality Control Commission, so that will be the regulating body of it. And so in talking to Mona a little bit, there's a broad support, there's a broad coalition that has been working on this for quite some time, and so everyone's pretty supportive of it going through the rulemaking process at the Air Quality Control if it is approved, and that's where a lot of the specifics can get hashed out. But at the large level, that the metrics are really reasonable. The 50% by 2030 is apparently aligned with the governor's bill as well as Xcel Energy's goals, which so it's good that those all align, and that it affects more than just the electrical grid. There's also cost effectiveness measures that people believe are built into it. So at a broad stroke, it is there. What I've heard is that it's supportive, it's reasonable, and actually has a chance in that going through the rulemaking process is really where a lot of the rubber hits the road. So just requesting Pitkin County support outside of just CC4CA to sign on to this coalition letter if you guys are interested.
Is there any negatives to us signing on? I can't really see any.
I mean, the only thing I can see is that since, from what I understand, we as a board have not set like metrics for carbon reductions. Now we're publicly saying that those are good metrics, and if we decide to have that conversation, then that would be at least a starting point. So just a consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should sign on. Every discussion we have as we look at our strategic plan and it's from our retreat. I mean, addressing climate change has always risen to the top. As I think has been stated, this is a reasonable plan. It's got some specific goals, and we've got to start somewhere. And I think, as to your point, Kelly, this will help us. Cindy and her crew is actually trying to identify some specific goals for the county. We've done that internally, but we're looking at more countywide, and so this will certainly help in that process, I think.
So do we need to do it as, can we do it as a group? Can somebody facilitate just signing Pitkin County on, or do we need it individually? Because I can't find her in my email anymore.
Yeah, I can figure it out. I can do it for
I'm
you.
happy to relay that message to CC4CA too.
Yeah, that'd be great. If they want us individually, send it back to me, and if they want to do it as a group, I think
Yeah.
the group's ready to go.
And
Me
I
and
would-
Greg would be there.
Just reiterate then the ask is that they really are trying to get this coalition beyond just even local governments. So any of your peers that you feel relaying the message, if you feel comfortable too.
I have a Northwest COG meeting on Thursday, but we don't usually take positions on. But
I can give you a fact sheet if you want to distribute.
that'd be great. I'm here tomorrow, so.
This one is important. This is House Speaker Casey Becker's bill, which she has the executive privilege of bringing a later bill like this that's so important. So she's really been working on it, getting it ready to bring to the floor. I think also that I don't know the specifics of different parts of the bill. I'm sure it will all be open to discussion and amendments and whatnot. So we should probably take a look at it and see if there's any amendments that we'd want to work towards, or if we can just support the whole thing.
I did briefly discuss that with Mona, and I guess one of the groups she's a part of is looking at making some minor amendments up front, and it really just has to go with environmental justice and kind of the income qualifications that are part of it, but feels they're really just minor, not substantive, and otherwise feel like it really does meet also the environmental justice aspects related to energy efficiency. So.
Okay. And I printed out an article this morning from the Santa Fe New Mexican. The governor, their new governor, Lujan Grisham, just signed a landmark clean energy bill in New Mexico, which sets a goal of 100% electrical utility renewal, non-carbon emission. It doesn't say renewable, it says non-carbon emission by the year 2045. So this is the most ambitious goal of any state in the nation, I believe. And by non-carbon emission, it means it could include a nuclear power plant aspect of it, I believe. But I thought that was good for them. They took a bold action, and we can take a bold action with this bill too.
Absolutely.
Don't they have coal mining in New Mexico? I think they do. That'd be interesting to see how that's being responded to.
The other item I had for you was following up on the Title X rulemaking. I believe you guys saw that Senator Bennett had sent a letter to Secretary Azar requesting, kind of putting in their comments, and I know Kelly had reached out wondering where we were with our congressional delegation. And I just wanted to follow up. I did talk with Karen. No Planned Parenthood in the state of Colorado actually gets Title X funding. Community Health Services does get Title X funding, but it's not related to abortion. So the only item relevant in the Title X changes is the gag order, which essentially means that you can't talk about your reproductive health options. And so we're working on a letter to address that part, but that's really how it impacts community health services. And so follow up, and then we'll have a letter and send that off. And then we are following up, as you may have seen, the actuarial study came out on the reinsurance program that does show that it will reduce individual premiums by 23%, and that it is able to fund it. And so working on the bullet points that Dave Ressler had also shared with you guys, and we'll share that with Steve and Kelly to share with CCAT, as well as a letter on kind of those amendments.
Great.
Could you forward that study? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I just saw it yesterday, so.
Okay.
And I'm sure, the only other thing is just for your reference, that it sounds like they have introduced debrucing measures at the state, that it would potentially, if approved, would go to the state ballot for the state to debruce. According to CCI, I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, they believe now with the efforts on Tabor and debrucing, they are not going to pursue any Gallagher changes. So we don't know what that means in the residential assessment rate. So we'll be keeping an eye out on if it stays at the 7.2% or if that is decreased. So
I'd love to see the specifics of what they're looking at, putting on the ballot.
And just to
It's such a
clarify,
big-
what I understand is that if the legislature does nothing, the current rates stand.
Right.
So they will continue forward at the 7.2 right? And that's some of the discussion that we have been part of with CCI is, and CCAT are real concerns about just addressing Gallagher could actually create more complications without it being part of a bigger debrucing or Tabor package.
I agree with that. I just want to see if there's anything else that might be, as far as debrucing, are there any other? I'd just like to see what they're proposing.
Yeah, we can
Probably
pull.
get that from the
Me
Colorado-
too.
I bet the Colorado Fiscal Institute has.
I know CCAT is following, and there's there's two bills paired together about them, I believe, right?
I'll pull up the Colorado Financial Institute and see what
But we
they,
can share that information.
see what I can come up with on that angle.
Okay. And then the last bit is that we are gonna do, just peripherally, that we're watching how the all-day kindergarten shapes up and following some of where that funding piece is. I know that a lot of I think CCI and CCAT are looking at where the funding is being taken from to potentially fund that. So we'll be tracking that, and we'll probably be coming back here to update you guys on that.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thanks. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Now we move to board open discussion. John?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Only thing I have for you guys today, and I guess I could have done this during future agendas also, but the county staff has been working with members of the community, and you've seen some newspaper articles on this, but we've convened a discussion about housing stability, and that's really the full continuum of services that would help people move from homelessness, hopefully out of homelessness. And it's a community conversation, not unlike what we convene to start off our mental health conversations, to look at what is the full continuum of services that should exist in the community. Where are the gaps? Are there ways for us to fill those? And part of this was prompted, you may recall, last summer we were trying to find in very short order some solutions, particularly around the wildfire danger, both to protect our homeless population that is living in that wildland-urban interface, but also maybe creating some fire risk through camps and such. And we had that raised a lot of issues, and so it really led to these conversations. What we've noticed, we've had elected officials from Aspen take interest. So Ann Mullins has been participating, and Ward Houndstein has been participating, not as a council rep necessarily, but as an interested party. We thought, given that, it may be appropriate to try and designate a board member to maybe start attending these housing stability meetings and be part of this conversation. The next meeting is April 11th from 8:30 to 10:30 at the Aspen Chapel. We're really, like I said, focused on designing a model or a continuum of services that promote housing stability, working with our partners in the community. And we're hoping to develop a few priorities or recommendations by July so that they could be considered in any public or nonprofit entities following year's budget. So I wanted to throw it out there and see if there's any interest among the board to maybe designate a rep to participate in that.
I'm free on the 11th, and I think this is a broader discussion. I mean, this is a discussion we've been talking about for many years. Not just on a seasonal basis, but on a year-round basis. So unless there's any other member of the board who's really keyed into it, I just put it out there that I'm available on the 11th.
Are you committing to future meetings as well? I mean,
I don't know
I'm
when the-
happy to
I don't know when future
Be the
meetings are, because I don't
designee,
think they've
but-
set them yet.
just I'm wondering.
Yeah,
The-
depends on when future meetings are. I don't know.
Yeah, we haven't scheduled. We know when the next one is, and then we typically There's a kind of an executive committee, a smaller group that's doing some work behind the scenes, and as they're ready to present some findings or recommendations, we schedule a larger.
And nothing to say that both Kelly and I couldn't go, and one could cover the
That's
other one, the
correct.
other couldn't
Yeah.
cover. So what time is it on that date?
It is April 11th from 8:30 to 10:30, and it's at the Aspen Chapel. And obviously, if we got more than two of you, we'd need to notice that, and it'd be a public meeting.
No, I just want to say that I'm sure two people could attend, so.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
Kelly, that way we could cover each other in future meetings.
Yeah.
I think, I'm interested in the topic too. I have an appointment in Glenwood right at that same time that day, but in the future, the issue of homeless issue kind of ties into veterans issues and also aging population issues, because there's a higher percentage of veterans and aging people who they sometimes tend to lose their security of housing and end up being homeless. Not intending to, but, so it's great, we got a couple who can go to this meeting, and I think having a commissioner there, or at least one or more commissioners, would be appropriate.
Well, I suspect because we are identifying gaps, there are gaps, and I think to your point, Steve, the types of services, whether it be case management or whether it be other resources that may help folks avoid homelessness or may help folks address issues that are preventing them from exiting homelessness. So those are types of discussions that are happening, and so we'll be bringing those back obviously to the full board, but we thought it'd be good to have some board representation, because there's some momentum now behind these conversations.
And John, you've been going, right? So you
Yes.
could sort of bring Patty and I up to speed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So please remind us to do that before the meeting.
Okay.
And if we could have a regular, when there is a meeting of the homeless coalition, if we could have a report back to the commissioners after those meetings, just as a
Yeah,
regular.
we could do that.
Regular thing, so that could keep us all up to speed on what's going on.
Yeah, we can do that after the April 11th meeting, especially with two representatives. We can hit that during open discussion and give a brief update. So, and then the only other thing I had, just a reminder, I'm going to be out starting tomorrow for the rest of the week. We're just doing a quick spring break jaunt to Minneapolis.
Minnesota.
So sunny, warm Minneapolis.
We know how to
Is it
live.
chilly or something?
That's all I had.
I don't know if you ever heard the song, John, about what do they do in Minnesota in the cold and frosty winter time.
What is, no.
It's a
I'll have to go listen to it.
really cute song. It's a polka, actually. The song is a polka.
That sounds fitting.
That sounds about right. And I had missed, Lisa also had an update.
Just a little quick update for you all. Good afternoon, everybody. Lisa McDonald with the Healthy Rivers Program. I just wanted to let the board know that last Thursday we received a $45,000 grant for the Robinson Ditch project that we've been seeking funding for. This came from the Colorado Water Conservation Board Water Supply Reserve Fund. So we have a few more that we are waiting to see if we are awarded in May, but this was the first one that we received on the ditch program.
George.
That's great. I thought, Lisa, we also received a Goko grant for the Basalt Kayak Park.
Yep, I talked to you guys about that last
Did?
week.
Okay.
Yeah,
How much was that for?
350,000.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, yeah.
Good
So I
job.
just wanted, we just found out that on Thursday, Quinn Donnelly with River Restoration went and represented for us and did a little 45-second spiel, I think he said it was, and they approved it. So we have two more coming in May that we're working with CPW on, and another water supply, I can't even remember the name of the other one, but it's with the CWCB too. So, and we're gonna go and talk to Eagle County. We're working with Basalt and some other local
job.
groups. So yeah, we're rolling on Robinson, and once maybe we get a little more firmed up on all of that, we'll be back to you guys and talk more detail.
Well, that's good news about the Robinson ditch.
Yeah, I know,
headgate,
everyone is
'cause
so excited
That was
about
really a
Robinson.
public safety hazard for
Yeah,
radical change on what the river's like right
Yes.
there. That I'm sure that's upended a lot of
Yep.
boaters
yep, I know,
unintentionally.
all the fishing guides and everyone's really excited about this project,
Yeah.
so just wanted to give you the heads up.
Thank you.
All right, thanks guys.
We like those kind of heads up, Lisa, anytime.
Okay, next up is the engineering department, and G.R. Field, their fearless leader, will lead the discussion.
Thank you, Steve. Just give me a moment and I'll pull up this presentation. Or not. There we go. Thanks again. I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer, and we have a collection of folks from Public Works and from Community Development here today. We're going to go through our engineering update for 2019. We do this from time to time, and a lot of times what will come out of these is a few questions back, and then we can bring back some specific projects or specific concepts or things about the program itself.
Are you looking for the, there's a little screen down in the orange part at the bottom. If you click on that. There you go.
Thanks, John. So several years back, our engineering staff itself grew from a staff of 2 to 3 with the addition of Chris Baruti, our project engineer. On top of that, we've also recently gotten more administrative help with some restructuring at Public Works and bringing Romney on board. Between that, we've been able to better service the program that we've heard need for, whether it's partnering with landfill to look at some of their projects, open space and trails for their projects. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about who we are, what we do, what's gotten done, a bit of what's coming up, a little bit of when to expect it, and hopefully a few of the hows of how we get it done. Bert is our institutional knowledge. He's been here for over 32 years now. He does a lot of our asset management, working in a database that logs a lot of our roadway assets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. He administers our permit program. We talked about that a little bit last week, and I have a couple updates based on our conversation on McLean Flats and some of the other projects. And he also helps administer our traffic count program, where we have a goal of trying to get as many traffic counts on primarily our main roads and all the way down the list to our secondary roads. Things like Richmond Hill Road, we don't get all that often, but a lot of our roads we get every single year. Chris Baruti is our project engineer. He brings a lot of the design experience in-house to the county. A lot of these projects that Chris handles, normally what we would do is we'd end up hiring several different consultants to be able to pull these projects together. He brings that all in-house. The way that we're organized right now, we do divvy our time up between a lot of different departments. Between Public Works is our primary. As I mentioned before, we do a lot of projects for open space and trails that are building a lot of things right now. Landfill, EOTC, all of those different things, we try to bring as much as that as we can through our engineering department. The program, pavement maintenance, that is a lot of what we hear about. Our roads have potholes, or they're starting to crack, they're starting to fail. A couple years ago, we did a pavement study, and one of the recommendations that we brought back to the board was to change our philosophy. We had been doing best first, trying to keep all of our nice roads in good condition, and we transitioned to worst first, and we'll talk about what the consequences of that are in a few. Capital improvements. We'll see, we don't really have too much on our capital improvement list for right now. And capital replacements, we have one big project coming up, and that's a bridge replacement on Castle Creek Road. Right-of-way oversight. This has turned into a lot of work for us, and it's been a very interesting dynamic. Whether it's private individuals bringing projects to the county that they would like to fund, or the complexity of the permits that we discussed last week, the overseeing different easements and right-of-way documentation, whether it's a vacation of a road, accepting easements, or accepting right-of-ways. There's a lot of work there, a lot of administrative work. I talked about a lot of the others already, whether it's open space, traffic counts, landfill project consultation, community development referrals. Catherine's in the back here, and Catherine and I work together a lot on whether it's access onto a county road and trying to find the best place coming off of a parcel, to hey, can you put an extra set of eyes on this because it's a large earth moving project for one of the houses. Also, we've partnered in getting help in project engineering from Catherine to try to bring more experience into the, for her as well. And then the last other is involvement with being able to be involved for myself with the project leadership team at the airport recently, and that's been a huge opportunity for me. The system, our roads system is about 108 miles of paved road. We have 23 bridges over 20 feet. The 20-foot number will become important later, but that's what CDOT considers a major structure. We have 151 miles of gravel or dirt roads, a lot of retaining walls. We're trying to figure out exactly how many square feet we have of that right now. We have 1,680 signs, give or take a few. And there's 784 culverts that we know about. We do find them from time to time. There's times that they've been buried for a long time, and that during some of the maintenance activities, we're like, oh, we should probably take a look at the drainage through this section. And Scott's guys will go through and sometimes find and open up some of the old ones. We also oversee a number of different streetlights, whether it's near the North 40 or in Redstone. Delineators and the ABC underpass is another one. One of the things that all of this, we try to clump this all into our core focus area, the flourishing natural and built environment. And so a lot of the AISs that we submit to you guys and the budgetary work always ends up being under that, that focus area. And I do like to think that we try to touch all four of those bullet points there. The conserve natural resources and environment, it's something that we always have an eye on. And we'll see that with one of our bridge projects. Responsibly maintain and enhance county assets, that's a core of what we do. The ease of mobility via safe and efficient transportation system should kind of speak for itself when we start talking about the county road system. And the well-planned and livable built environment is that integration of all of that. Revenue, a lot of times when we start having these conversations, we get a lot of questions on the revenue side, and up until this point I'd been remiss in actually including it in our presentation. So I tried to pull together what I could, and in general right now we're under the Road and Bridge Fund umbrella, and so Scott's maintenance staff and the engineering department on the road projects basically split that budget. It's a little bit more than 1/3 to 2/3. It's not quite half and half, but it's around that. And so in total, there's about $6 million in the program. In any given year, we're averaging around $2 million on our road and bridge system for capital maintenance or capital enhancements. For context in that, during a winter like this, Scott's guys will go just in plowing, which I know Kelly got an opportunity to go out with one of Scott's guys last week. That's about $700,000 a year program. And so when you start taking out those general maintenance items at 10%, 15% at a time, you can see how fast that budget will go. We're supplied by the HUTF funds, the Highway User Tax Funds, which is gas tax, registration, faster funds in the tune of about $1.7 million a year. Grant funds varies very much year to year. Road and bridge mill levy is pretty small at 0.181. It brings in around $500,000 a year. Right now, 32% of the sales tax is allocated to the road and bridge fund at about $3.7 million, or the lion's share of that budget. The road impact fees is about $80,000 a year. We're going to go out for an RFP soon to update those impact fees. And we're somewhere in the tune of about $6 million a year in revenue that we're bringing in.
JR, who pays for the impact fees?
So the road impact fees is an impact fee that is assessed when you are adding on to a house or building a new house. And it's supposed to capture part of what the impact to the road system is by that development.
Okay, thank you.
A few minutes ago, I mentioned that we went from a best first maintenance philosophy to a worst first. On the left on this slide is a graph, and it's a really generalized graph. But for a long time, we used a philosophy where we were trying to touch a lot of our better roads more often on the left side of the graph. At some point, you always have to pay the piper, though. And so we're in that right now. We've deferred action on a number of roads, and so now we're into that rehabilitation and reconstruction portion of the curve. So what we can expect from our pavement maintenance over the next several years is that we're going to be looking at a lot of the subdivisions and working in a lot of these subdivisions where we've pushed this off for a while. This year we're going to be in Mountain Valley doing a Cape Seal. Next year we're going to be in Glen Eagle, Horseshoe Drive, and Orchard Estates down in Emma. And that's where the program's going to be for a few years until we knock out a lot of those roads that are in a little bit of a lower condition. And then we can get back to some of our better conditioned roads. It's always a balancing act. I'm not going to say in the next year or two that we're not going to be here asking to switch some things around because we have to react. Whether it's we're seeing more deterioration on something like Brush Creek Road, which sees orders of magnitude more traffic than a lot of these roads. That may happen, but for right now, this is the plan. This is what we've presented in the past at our budget meetings.
GR, so for example, on Orchard Estates and I'm blanking it out, the other subdivision down in Emma. So we maintain the roads. Do we plow them?
Yes.
Those subdivisions as well?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
One of the most interesting things for us in our office is the debate of, was that ever our road? Or how do we handle that subdivision? Because there are a lot of subdivisions where we have approved the subdivision a long time ago. And then we approved a public road on a plat, and whether or not we ever adopted that road for maintenance it's all over the place. And we have all sorts of different agreements where we have public roads that are technically adopted by the county, but our agreement with, say, the Brush Creek Metro District is that we're going to collect the HUTF funds and we're going to just pass them through. They're not up to our standard. We're not going to go up there. We're not going to do the maintenance on those roads. But because you're willing to call them county roads and they are public roads, you're entitled to these fees. To places where Holland Hills, where that pass has been different, where they were platted as public roads. We plowed them for a while, and then back in the 80s, we decided that wasn't in our interest, and we gave up certain aspects of those roads at that time, but not necessarily all of the easements and how they were platted. So that goes also into a little bit of those easements and right-of-ways and some of the other oversight that I mentioned earlier. So that's a lot of years this ends up being a large part of our program. This year, because we are working on the Castle Creek Bridge project, it ended up being a little bit smaller. On the top of this is the same slide that you guys saw at our budget presentation back in probably around October. We started putting together a quick list of capital improvements that we had heard from folks. Since then, that list is, we haven't ever developed a formal list. And that's something that we've always had on the back burner. But one thing that you'll notice is that we only have one capital improvement budgeted for the next 10 years, and that's in partnership with our Open Space and Trails program to be able to do trail and road improvements along Owl Creek Road.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
If so at some point, so I don't forget. Looking up there at the Watson Divide improvements, it brought up a question when we were being contacted by members of that community on one side of Watson Divide, not the other, about doing major improvements like pavement. We need to discuss at some point a process for how those requests come forward. We've talked about it, and this might be an opportunity for me to note it so that we don't forget either at this discussion or at a future discussion. John Peacock too needs it. We need to try to create a process when people come forward and contact individual commissioners about their project they want to see in their individual neighborhood.
That's a very good segue, actually, Patty. So one of the things that we've been discussing internally and is how to develop that capital improvement list. In the past, we honestly haven't worried about it because we haven't had the funding for it. We're doing a pretty good job with our capital maintenance. We're doing a pretty good job with our structural maintenance and bridge maintenance. We still don't have, we're still not flush in cash where I'm gonna turn around and tell you, you know what, we got a couple $1 million sitting in our hip pocket and we'd like to do Watson Divide. So we are hearing a lot more of those requests. We're also hearing requests to develop, safety, what sort of safety improvements that we can incorporate along county roads, how much would that cost? And those numbers get enormous very, very quick to the tune of, I could tell you in 10 years, here's $56 million worth of projects, that's tier A. I don't get into that here, but those are the types of numbers that we can get into very, very quickly. Moving forward, we would like to move process forward with the board where if we were to either change our funding, our revenues, or change the way we operate, then we will need a process for vetting those sorts of projects. Again, right now, it's actually a little bit easier because we're like, we can't afford it.
Yeah.
In the middle of this slide is our structural projects. A large portion of our road capital budget is wrapped up in the Castle Creek Bridge project right now. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. We have a lot of other sorts of projects that are going on. Slope stabilization, we'll go over that project, or several projects. ABC underpass maintenance, every year we're out there doing maintenance, whether it's to the irrigation system. We had a sign blow down last year. We've had issues with the snowmelt system that we've had to repair over the last few years. So we've broken that out to its own line item. So in the out years now, we can start really tracking what we're spending at that specific location. Specialty studies, that's going to pay for our update for the road impact fees. Drainage improvements is a general line right now. Signage, we budgeted $25,000 each year. Several years back, the federal government required that we have a plan to update all of our signs to the current MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, standards and retroreflectivity. And so some places go through and just say, all right, each time that we touch a road, and we started down that path, we're going to try to update the signs. But then a lot of the contractors that we were working with were like, we don't want to deal with your signs. So we just broke out a project several years ago. We got a price back that we thought we could do it in-house. So we've been ordering a big bulk order of signs every year, and have partnered with Road and Bridge. And so the Road and Bridge staff now, when they're like, okay, well, we got that street done. I can't get a hold of so-and-so. Let's just grab 3 of the signs and go out. Or Scott can assign, hey, on this day, you guys are going to go out and try to knock out all the signs and update them on this road. And so we've gotten a lot of our busiest roads done already. We've gotten Old Snowmass done. and we're going to start moving our way down based on our traffic counts. The last line item on this is one of the more interesting ones sometimes. It's our guardrail. I broke that out. We've been spending a lot of money. We have a lot of guardrail repair, whether it's because we're pushing a lot of snow, or if it's because of crashes, sometimes we don't know why. We just show up one day and part of the guardrail's damaged. But it's becoming more of a significant part of our program. Right now, where we're budgeted, we're not necessarily adding much, if any, guardrail. We're just in the repair mode. We did last year do a master service agreement, meaning a contract with the contractor, and that we can renew over the course of several years. So they start developing a relationship with us, and they're going to come in and do that same repair every year. Not same location, hopefully, but same repairs every year. All right, so we're going to fire through some of our recently completed projects. If you have questions on the projects, a lot of the staff that has handled it is here. I'm going to have them come up and help answer questions because there's a lot here. This should be familiar. We did a lot of updates last year on the Public Works yard. We have seen a lot, like several $1,000s of savings per fuel load coming in to Public Works. And because of some of these changes at Public Works that we've made, now we don't just get the economy of scale of this location. We're starting to get the economies of scale at all of our locations because we can order tankers for the airport and Public Works and soon for the landfill. And so that portion is going to prove to be a pretty solid investment in the future. The tanks were absolutely massive. They had to be set with a large crane. We have just a couple punch list items that we call it to finish up with this project. We added a generator so that the Public Works facility will be able to be up and operational should we have some sort of natural disaster, power outage, or whatever the case may be. And so we have some of that work to complete this spring, and we hope that that'll be buttoned up pretty quickly. Here's our
Who got that
our
photo?
rainbow shot. A lot of us got that shot.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if this one is mine or Jonah's, but. One of the cooler aspects of the project is being able to actually make our pond that's out there for stormwater retention usable again. So this is a few of the shots of the pond. This is out in between the Public Works cabin, where it's employee housing, and what we call our sand shed, which is some of our equipment storage. Lazy Glen. Just give me a moment. I need to catch up with my notes, or else I'm going to forget some stuff. Chris Brody ran the Lazy Glen project as the project engineer for open space and trails. You're going to realize that that's becoming a big theme, is Chris running a lot of these as a project engineer. It was a pretty large project. Bridge over the Roaring Fork, trail, some work around the irrigation ditches and everything else, paving, excavation.
It's amazing out there.
It really is. It's been a huge improvement for access to the Rio Grande for that community. Out on Prince Creek Road, the bullpen. That work, another one that Chris Brody oversaw as the project engineer, very, very well used. I was out there a lot this fall. I was always blown away by how many people were using the bullpen. Included a parking lot, bridge, and a little bit of new trail to connect all of that. A few more shots of that from up on the hill, across the bridge, and looking down that road. These are always the fun ones. The Aspen Village light. There's a pedestrian light on the corner going up the hill from the gas station into Aspen Village. We own that about 1/10 of a mile of road, and the light got put in during one of the CDOT projects. We play the game every time we have maintenance on one of these as whose asset is it? And then usually falls to us. And so on this one, someone crashed into it and did a significant amount of damage. And I think we really try with issues like this to chase that rabbit down the hole. Sometimes we can find the accident data. We can get the accident report from Colorado State Patrol or Sheriff's Office, and then contact the insurance company and get reimbursed for repairs. This is not a case that happened, but it's a lot of administrative work to try to chase this rabbit because. And then you get to the insurance company, and that becomes a battle because they don't want to just write a check because they've probably already paying for part of the crash, or the person doesn't have insurance.
They're sure it's not their asset.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bert Pierce, our engineering technician, has been critical in scenarios like this where we're in the middle of a summer, we've got a lot of projects going on, and sometimes we can look at our whole program, maybe not do a few of our traffic counts, and we can get some support from Bert to oversee some of these projects. He's also a good example of when even just a small project that is just replacing a light pole base. You've got electrical, you've got concrete, you've got earth moving, you've got repairs, you've got to find the right bolts and the bolt pattern for the lights, and there's just so many little details that go in just to even repairing something like this. This is the sign I mentioned earlier at the ABC, that we had a large windstorm, we had a couple trees blown down, and or a lot of branches, and also that light came down. So it was another send it away, had get a metal shop to get everything attached in the right locations and put it all back together.
Okay, GR, who's responsible for the Basalt underpass?
The town of Basalt is.
The town is? Okay.
Yes. We provided some help in project oversight for the project and obviously some funding between both the county, open space, EOTC. That project actually had more funding sources than our underpass, which I never thought would happen, but I think we had 7 pots.
It was great.
All of our bridges over 20 feet in length get inspected by a consultant that's hired by CDOT. It's every other year. They submit to us a bridge condition on each of those bridges, along with recommended maintenance items. Some of those come with a timeline. This is the Upper Snowmass Creek Bridge. This is just before where the Snowmass Creek trailhead is, before you start heading up Divide Road to go the back way into Snowmass Village. The abutment here was had been scoured off, meaning it had been eroded. All of that material had been washed away. And during one of those inspections, they caught that. It wasn't a super critical item, but it was actually something that we could partner with our road and bridge crew and complete in-house. We got a few drawings done by a structural engineer and came up with a recommended materials, and we were able to source all that materials from the landfill and perform this with equipment that we own, and we get to share between road and bridge and open space and trails. As you can imagine, getting under a bridge with it has to be a little bit smaller of a piece of equipment. And so we've been really happy with how this project turned out. Red Mountain rockfall mitigation, open space and the county and the Red Mountain Homeowners Association went through a negotiation process, and through that it was determined that some rockfall needed to happen up on the new open space above the Red Mountain Ranch Homeowners Association. And these are just some of the shots of the as constructed. As you can see, the netting ended up being pretty well camouflaged up there. And we were really happy with how the project turned out. Originally, Catherine Christoph was managing the project, but she had to go on maternity leave. So I got to fill in for a few months and watch some, oops. I don't know if this is going to play, but that is a piece of that netting.
Is that a helicopter?
Yeah, it's attached to a helicopter, and this is supposed to be a video, but it's... There it goes. So we got to spend a lot of time late fall, early winter up on Red Mountain watching the helicopter operations.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it?
I like where this video stops for a few reasons. Is you can see on the ridge all the way to the left, just before the end, is one of the sites. And then the ridge that runs the whole length of the right is several of the sites that needed to be mitigated. So it's a pretty broad project area. And so it was pretty fun getting up there and hiking the little goat paths that had gotten cut in to get to all the different sites. We've spent a lot of time up on the South Bridge in Redstone the last several years. We've done channel work because there is an abutment or a pier in the middle of the river that has sustained damage over the years. It is our oldest bridge in our system, and I think with the work that we've done to it, it's going to maintain in our system for a long time. We moved a lot of that cobble around in the river, moved it around that pier, reinforced it with some grout. We did a lot of work to the bridge deck with an overlay that's polyester concrete. It's the same thing that CDOT used in the canyon to do some of their repairs a couple years ago. And I think it's pretty similar to the product that they used on the Glenwood Springs Bridge. Bridge joints. And we also did some work around the abutments, which turned out really nice. I don't have a picture of it in here, but it ended up matching the red sandstone in the background on the redstone side. Another project that I'm very proud of is another one that we got to partner in-house, where the Thompson Creek Reclamation, we had 3.5 miles of failed pavement. We went back and paved a small section, but reclaimed and put it back to dirt. Scott Screw won an award for that through the APWA, and we've gotten a lot of very, very positive feedback on that. And it saved us a couple $100,000, frankly, to not go back and repave the whole road that only gets a few cars a day. All right, so here's our projects in the work.
That's a great example of design.
Here's another project that Chris is the project engineer for. It's got about a $450,000 total budget, and the hope is to be able to pair this to an intelligent transportation system that can give us travel time features. The sign's going to be near Cozy Point, and it sounds like everything's going to actually move forward in 2019 as opposed to 2020 now. This is probably a pretty good example of how involved these projects can get. You need a special use permit from CDOT, have to get utility clearances, coordination with the EOTC, different staff members here, RAFTA, manufacturers, put together plans, specs for both the sign itself and whatever that ITS system's going to be. So what we're seeing too is that a lot of these projects no longer are small. They're all pretty involved. Another one of Chris's projects that's moving forward right now, it started in the fall and it'll continue this spring, is the coke ovens right on 133 in Redstone. We did a lot of work several years back restoring some of the beehive coke ovens, and now it's getting some parking, a lot of earthwork, drainage, a lot of landscaping. I think that is the wharf wall on the lower left. Yeah. And that's part of the old historic features of that site, and so that's probably about a $500,000 program right there with grants from CDOT for somewhere in the tune of half of that. So expect that to move forward again whenever Redstone thaws out. Hopefully sooner than later, because I think they've got a contract date of around end of June to get it all done.
This June?
Yeah. Mountain Valley is moving forward, as we saw earlier, is one of our pavement maintenance items. One of the hard things, especially in our subdivisions, because we have a lot higher density, is with our permit system, we permit road cuts. And most of the time, they're like what you see here, where we have a lot of small road cuts that go across a road so someone can tie into natural gas or City of Aspen water or something like that. Mountain Valley has been developed and redeveloped a few times since the last time we did a full maintenance project in there. So there's a lot of patches. There's some sections that would be best described as a quilt. That's going to be a cape seal, which is essentially a chip seal with a slurry seal on top. It ends up being a very nice smooth surface. There's a decent amount of asphalt patching to repair some of the failed areas like you can see on the right of the screen. That's out for advertisement right now, so I'll tell you that that we budgeted somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 for the project, and we'll see where those bids come in. Road subsidence is something that we've started focusing on in the last few years, and road subsidence happens for a number of different reasons, but it's typically a failure along a hillside. When they were building a lot of our roads in the 1880s, and then they've been widened over the years, you end up pushing out, and then whatever holds up, holds up. And so we have oversteepened slopes along the side of a lot of our roads. And as time goes on, we have a lot of creeks next to those. Either they erode into that a little bit and they slowly move. A lot of times Scott's crew will go out and put a patch. As you see the pavement move down, maybe a quarter of an inch a year, an inch a year is pretty fast. We'll put a patch in there and then it'll be smooth for a few years. And to the point where that's actually a pretty reasonable maintenance effort in a lot of scenarios, and we've made that as a call. Now we're getting to the point where we've done that at some of these locations enough that we know better. So this year we've got several different project locations, one on Jerboz Road and two on Maroon Creek Road. The first on Jerboz, the picture on the left, you can see the asphalt patch that I was just mentioning. And that has been patched several times over the years. The picture on the right, it's really hard to see where the patch is, but I included it because up towards the end of the guardrail that you can see a little dip in the guardrail. That's where the guardrail is essentially going along for the ride. It's the whole slope is moving very, very slowly, and that guardrail is attached to it. So it's actually one of your indicators where you can see just a little bow in it. This location is going to get a small soil nail wall where they're going to be able to reach over the bank and install the soil nails, put some meshing there. A lot of these locations, we really, really like to try to keep as much vegetation there as we can because the different vegetation ends up being our natural retainage for all the slope next to it. Upper Maroon Creek Road site, this is just below T-Lazy 7. T-Lazy 7's a couple tenths of a mile just out of frame on this. We're going to use a big block wall, which is the same thing that we did up on Red Mountain a few years ago, and also what we used at the Public Works facility last year. It's a big Lego stacking block. They're big concrete blocks that are a couple feet wide, 1.5 feet tall. And in this picture, you can see there's an aspen tree. The wall is going to go actually just above that, along that slope. What we're hoping to be able to do is we've lost some of that roadway width over the years. We're not necessarily adding anything into this location, but we are going to be able to get back what we've lost and also in time improve the condition there so you'll be able to use that full width again.
It just reminds me, it's maybe more of a question for Scott. I seem to always hit that same manhole cover coming out of there on my bike. So do we refresh those manhole covers along our roads where we know we've got bicyclists?
Well, the manholes we try to pay attention to when the utilities put in, because they are part of the asset of that utility, and we try to get those grades right at that time. I don't know the particular manhole up here that you're speaking about. There's a lot of them on Maroon Creek Road.
But we usually stripe them,
right,
just to identify them, or paint them orange, and some of them the paint has been deteriorating, and it seems like they just need to be redone.
The whole manhole?
Well, just identifying.
Okay.
just to identify.
know
We
they
we
actually don't
we
have a-
usually we usually leave the identification of things that a road biker would consider a hazard to the community, and it's actually worked out pretty well over the years because it's not a context that we typically go out and take a look at the road in all the time. And so there's a lot of things. The last thing I would want to do is go out there and start painting some of the things that we think are the bad cracks in the road, the bad manholes, and we miss a few. And so that's something that we've traditionally left to those guys. And I know that, the Aspen Cycling Club, before they've got an event, usually goes out and refreshes, and before we have any of those other events.
So you're telling George to carry a spray paint can?
I'm not suggesting that George has to do the work.
Get out,
That's a good point.
pick a color, George.
But we have some cans of paint at the yard. We can tell you where to get some upside down paint, but be careful because
No, but that's a good point that Patty raises. So basically, you leave it up to the general public to go out and mark our roads. I'm not sure that's the best policy.
well, it's not policy. It's just been practice.
It's just what the cycling clubs do.
It's
before
been
race
what the
events.
cycling clubs do to try to save some injuries.
Yeah, we see it up and down.
And it's more
It's past. when
it's
they're
more
doing
of
race.
something that has been tolerated as an activity versus any sort of rule or anything along those lines.
So if we happen to miss one, we would be liable if that was a part of our policy to address all of those potential obstacles or hazards on the road.
That would be, yeah, I mean, it'd be a new program
Yeah.
for us to figure out.
Therefore, carry a spray paint can.
The second location on Maroon Creek Road is the lower Maroon Creek Road site. This is a couple tenths of a mile past Highlands, just past, going past some of the houses that are built just below grade on the right.
Old heather bed.
Yes, and you can see on this picture, it's a little bit hard to pick up the headscarp or the scar on the ground that you can see where the landslide kind of comes up through the asphalt. Actually goes about from the trees that you can see where the bend is up to the front of or the right side of this picture. You can see some pink demarcations. That's where the Aspen City Water thought their feed was. It actually ended up being on the left-hand side of the road where the blue mark is. But you can see that you can actually see a bit of where that propagates through the asphalt. This is going to be another soil nail wall. This is something that we actually did do a pretty robust geotechnical evaluation of the soils in here because it's so steep going up to the houses and up to Highland Ski Area on your left, and then it's really steep going down probably 30 or 40 feet down to the river on your right. And so we didn't know what that depth of the failure was. A lot of times these are closer to the surface failures. This one we didn't know. And so we put a monitor down into something. It's like down into a well, and it records over time where that movement is. And so we can mitigate this with a soil nail wall that extends about 15 feet down below the road.
When are these projects on Maroon Creek planned?
The proposals are due on Thursday, and we gave the contractors for the upper wall, the big block wall, a large window that extends into the fall to do that for this site, and for the Jerbaz Way site we gave them until July 26th.
I'm just concerned about coordination, specifically on Maroon Creek with RAFTA bus rider numbers, and when the fall is, and it's crazy up there with people who aren't really paying attention because they're looking around. So
And that's something that we've made everyone well aware of, and
just a concern.
we're not, for a site like this, we will have a couple minute delays, but we're going to have one lane open and it'll be alternating directions.
Because we have not just buses and we have bikes, big, and that's a pretty blind, sketchy curve anyway.
Well, I'm sure our traffic control will extend up around the curve far enough that we have good sight lines. So we can expect those to be moving forward, though. And these are a little bit shorter duration projects. The walls, a couple weeks at a time, is what we expect those impacts to be. versus what we saw with the permits and the gas line that's
From
going to take.
McLean Flats.
all
I've heard
s-
about that
you
all
know.
morning at Accra.
So, I'm missing a slide. The last project that I had to tell you about. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Actually, I have a slide well out of order. The Upper Castle Creek Bridge. This is our lowest rated bridge in our system. In fact, it's one of the lower ones on the off system, not on CDOT system, statewide. We won a grants for engineering last year. Because now that we're into that CDOT process, it adds a significant amount of time to the design process to go to check all of their boxes, whether it be environmental review or structure selection reports. And there's 3 reviews along the way, and each one of them adds between 2 and 4 weeks. So we're pushing this out to 2020 construction. We do think that we'll hopefully be able to advertise it this year. It's our only bridge that we have a bridge rating on, where we have to restrict the size and weight of the loads that are going across it. Right now, we're about halfway through the design process. The fun thing about this bridge is on the lower right, you can see a bunch of random bolts that are attached to some brackets on the I-beam, on the girder. That was where the old bridge rail was attached. We don't know exactly when the bridge deck got expanded on this bridge. We don't have that project history. We're thinking that maybe the bridge even got moved there at some point in time, or pieces of the bridge were reused. So we're happy that we'll be replacing this one out of our inventory next year. Owl Creek Road. This one we've been before the board several times in the last 3 years about. This is above K2 Ranch, next below East Owl Creek Ranch, alongside Owl Creek Ranch. I think this might be going into phase 3. The Chris Baruti provided design. Road and Bridge went out and dug a channel and lowered this next to the road, and all of the water that you see here is just spring water that is coming up and through, and that has helped dewater our road template. And then we last year they did phase 2 and added a culvert that's helping feed that now, and there's water coming in from our road side drains that are buried that you can't see. We still have water seeping up, not nearly as much or as extreme
There still is
as
some.
we did several years ago when that was a skating rink some mornings. So phase 3, we're hiring a contractor and we're putting in additional underground drainage, essentially. And so when you put in an under drain, it's a coarse aggregate, it's chunky, and then you put a fabric around it. So that way your road base fines, the smaller sands and silts and clays don't migrate into that material. Here we're going to do a whole mat of that across a section of the roadway, and it's I'm very anxious to see how this performs, because I think Chris came up with a really cool idea of how to solve some of our spring issues. Frankly, we've worked with some of the adjacent ditch owners, and we have. Just actually, I think where the picture on the left is probably standing on a couple big boulders that are sitting there, where if they need to, they can drop a boulder into this channel and it'll kick over to the next channel, because just on the picture on the right, there's another channel, because that's how much spring water is in this location. And that's what feeds the lower half of the Owl Creek Ranch.
I drive that almost daily, and that has been a big improvement so far.
All right, so we're wrapping up. One of the things that we came last week, we talked about permits very quickly. I got to give you that oversight. I'm not going to go into that here. The board asked several questions. We asked about, I think Steve asked about efficiencies. Black Hills Energy came with a pretty long statement actually about how they encourage when there is, new development or redevelopment to use as much efficiency, but really they got into why they're trying to just keep up with the market here. They are taking our suggestion of exploring building a shoulder on Jaffe Hill for part of that. It's probably going to only make sense for the upper stretch of that road, but it might be able to give us some more platform to work with in the future. We did talk to them about potentially adding conduit into their hole. One dig is a good policy when it works, but for a project like this, they're really trying to keep the trench as narrow as possible so they can move as fast as they can. With some of the federal regulations that they deal with, they need at least, I think it's a foot of horizontal clearance. And when they only have a 2-foot trench and they're trying to put their pipe most of the time right in the middle of that, they're not going to be able to get that separation horizontally for a conduit for something like fiber optic in the future. When you're dealing with all dry utilities, like if it was a phone line going in or something like that, we have a lot more flexibility with that. We don't have a one dig policy right now in Pickens County. We try to encourage that. We try to find areas where we can work with the utilities when they're going in. One of the other things that they wanted me to note too from Black Hills is that adding this line allows them to remove 18 regulator stations along their existing line that goes across McLean Flats and through Woody Creek and that. So it's a big improvement for them. And so that's what they want to send back over what our conversation was a few weeks ago. And I think I accidentally put this slide in the wrong place. We have a lot of things that are on our back burner. Redevelopment of roadway design standards would something that we touch not very often. I've looked at them maybe twice in my 12-year tenure. But when we look at things like our permitting, and if we would ever want to move to a one dig philosophy and figure out a way to either get placeholder conduit in the ground or develop multimodal standards for when we're, redevelopment of a road's coming and we can partner with open space and trails and build a bike lane or something along those lines, that would help in that process. Beginning of last year, I brought phase 1 of the local road safety plan to the board, and we discussed a lot of our crash data over 5 years. We've been working on some projects, but largely that's been on the back burner to develop that part of the program because, frankly, we don't have the capacity to do that kind of programmatic level work right now. Updating the permit system, we've been doing that constantly, but looking at some of the best practices that some of our neighbors are using and the way that they're doing their permitting, we might bring something as amendment to the road maintenance and management plan at some point. Again, this is on the back burner. These programmatic things we haven't had time to take care of, but to do something along those lines so it'll help streamline our process. Because like we talked about last week, it's becoming a lot more difficult to handle our permits. They're getting bigger, they're more robust, they're big projects as opposed to I need a water tap and it's going to take me 2 days. The last thing we've talked about that's extremely difficult is a roadway right-of-way request system and mapping. We've got a lot of records on what our right-of-ways and easements are across the county, and they date back to the 1880s, and even before that, from before Pickens County was a county. We don't have those records from Gunnison County right now. We've teased the idea of going over there and trying to pull some of that stuff. But more and more, we get a lot of requests of, what is the right-of-way in this location? Hey, can you tell us what the history here is? And it's a pretty large administrative lift to be able to do some of that, to the point where there's a lot of times where we tell a lot of the planners or the attorneys that call us, you're going to have to do your own research on this one. But we really try to be accommodating. And so this is something that we've struggled whether or not, should it be part of our program day to day, or should it just kind of live on the back burner? We've looked at mapping this and including our GIS department and working with them. But one of the things that has happened since the 1880s is some of the surveying standards have changed. And so we have some right-of-ways that don't quite overlap exactly with our mapping today. And so we would need a pretty large survey project to rectify all of that and move that survey data around to where it would actually be today. And so that concludes most of me talking, which was a lot. And really what I wanted to ask the board is, there are parts of the program or specific projects that you really want to get down into the details. A lot of these are underway, and so it'd be a little bit of steering a ship to make any monumental changes. But there's certainly a lot more detail in every single one of those things that we can unpack. I thought of this presentation a little bit of a broad stroke with a fine brush. Trying to get a little bit of everything and try to just put in a little bit of detail on each thing so you have a sense of what all is going on your road system.
Steve, can I real quick?
Oh, yeah.
Just to go back to the process when people come to the board and say, I want to pave McLean Flats, I want to pave Watson Divide. And you know, of course, the first response is we don't have the money, because we don't have the money for a multi-million-dollar project. Is there some kind of, I don't know, do we just refer them all to you? And then do we keep a list, so in the future if we have some huge, I mean, I don't know, and you know, because then people go, will you get back to me? And it's like, well, in 20 years maybe, when we have the money.
A lot of time, the hard thing is the answer to the question is with what, right? Yes, I can get back to you with what.
Yeah.
And we've trust us.
Don't have the money.
And a lot of times, how it typically happens is Scott, Brian, myself, someone from Public Works will get the phone call. Hey, this is what we're thinking. Or, hey, we're developing our new caucus master plan. Can we put this in there? I mean, yeah, you can put it in the master plan. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen at any given point.
Good place to log it, though.
But it's a good place to log it. Because one of the things that happens when we look at a project that's as large as paving a Watson Divide, that's going to go through a location and extent review. The location and extent review is something that gets referred to P&Z, and their task is to review it against the local master plan. And so if there's something called out in the local master plan, like the WOMP called out the underpass or the road improvements to the ABC, that makes it very, it helps that, brings that process in line. So I guess the master planning process is one answer, but most of the time we're handling a lot of the questions at the staff level, and then when they don't like our answer, we move it up the chain.
Or they move it up the chain.
Or they move it up the chain. They don't like our answer, so.
In some cases now they're coming to us first, and then we're having to refer it back to you. So just so we know that there's a place, and you're right, the master planning process is perfect for Watson Divide, but
trust us,
especially when one side wants it and the other side doesn't.
On the staff side, we've got a ton of ideas of some of the improvements that we'd like to see over the years too. And so I do think that something of a conversation with the board that would be probably pretty heavily dialogue, just to shoot around a lot of the ideas. Because the other problem is some of those ideas might fly a little bit in the face of some of the master plans that some of the caucuses have. But I could see them getting on board with some iteration of an improvement, because Woody Creek's master plan goes pretty heavily into what they don't want to see as far as road improvements.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Some things like, I think of the road to Lanedo or the Watson Divide Road. We could, given enough money, we could actually pave them, but should we? You pave a road, people are going to drive a lot faster. And I've had people complain to me, people are driving so fast on what's already paved that it's so dangerous they don't even want to walk their dog along the road in some places. So it's kind of a policy decision too, and not just a economic thing, whether a road should be paved. Or in the case of the Thompson Divide Road, we turned it back into gravel, was the thing that made the most sense.
Right.
And so it's a sort of a bigger picture than just looking at, well, we don't have enough money, so therefore we're not doing it, when we maybe never should do some of the roads.
Right. And, a lot of times with this conversation, Steve, it doesn't come down to what should be paved or not. We've got some rules of thumb that we can work with that. But it's a lot of times it's intersection improvements, bringing our roads up to standards. like I said, a lot of our roads were developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and just kind of expanded when they needed to be. And we're suffering some of those consequences now because of some of the building practices that they used back then. So, one of the things that gets difficult when we look at a road project and it's just capital maintenance, man, wouldn't it be nice to, all right, maybe put a small shoulder on this road, whether it's for give cyclists some room or to get up to standard. And so, I floated that $56 million number. That's a bit of work that we did at a request of the Financial Advisory Board and looking at safety initiatives. And by the time we start adding up those numbers, they're really large. And so, yeah, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars per road sometimes to put in a shoulder because we have steep embankments and things of that nature. But there are a lot of areas where, I'd love to do intersection improvements and add some shoulder to some roads because we have a lot of lane departures. We don't have a shoulder. People hook their tire in the ditch because they went, only a few inches off of the travel way. So.
Kelly?
Whenever are you finished?
Well, I have one more thing on the update the permitting system. And when you said that, I started thinking of the APSHA computer system, which is inadequate to handle what they're dealing with, and they end up spending a lot of staff time because they don't have an updated system. And I'd like to ensure that you don't get into that kind of a dead-end thing where you really need to update a system and you don't have time to do it because you're so busy handling all the permits. That kind of a catch-22.
Right.
Whereas if at some point we can put in the resources to update something that needs doing, even if we, maybe have to hire extra help to get something done, but then if that saves you a lot of staff time going down the road, it would be worthwhile looking at doing that.
Well, thank you for that, Steve. I think we're not necessarily in the same ballpark as like an APSHA or even ComDev. While I do think we can get some efficiencies through software, what I'm looking at is a little bit more broad-based in that because of what we talked about last week. I'm asking my staff to go out and watch these projects more because they're much more impactful to our traveling public. And if we can get some efficiencies on that administrative, whether it be software or adopting an entire package that we just hand to every single permittee and start getting a little bit more standardized in that. And we've done a pretty good job of making big steps in that direction already. I think that will it'll grow this system up a little bit to get into the level of some of these larger projects that we're seeing, so that it's not so. It doesn't seem like as heavy of a lift every time one of those permits comes in. So, but no, I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Okay, Kelly?
Thank you. I was wondering, is there an opportunity, given the increase in permits that you guys are seeing and approving for this summer, in addition to your road work, to work with maps, GIS on their Maps and More programs, so that the public could just go and see, like, all right, what roads are closed right now or what roads have construction, so they can plan maybe either their cycling or their travel or something, a little bit more seamlessly.
Yes, that technology is out there. We've discussed it at the staff level already. We haven't had time to start developing that yet. In the past, when we've tried to do a lot of those updates and do them on the website, the hard part was updating the website. Sure. And we do our staff meetings every 2 weeks. Probably not the frequency that we need to update the website to get some credibility with the public that they can go there at any given time and get an accurate update. That being said, we've tried some of those website updates in the past with some successes. We've also done a lot of radio time. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from that in some of our newspaper interactions too, whether we request that the permittee take out an ad in the newspaper. And some of the other technology we've used is roadside signs with the variable message signs that they can park and give updates, and then we ask them to have their project contact's phone number on there so that they can give updates. But that's certainly something that we can look at and work with our GIS folks to go through, because I think that might be also a good solution for a lot of people that are coming to do the road cycling or recreating and just don't know how to tune in locally.
Right. Well, and maybe free up some phone traffic to your office too. And then I just want to comment, I'm not super satisfied by Black Hill's reply, because they're trying to expand respond to what they see as customer demand here, and that which kind of goes in contrast to other board policies about looking more towards electrification and things like that, broader. And I know it's easy to say no, and I would have hoped that they would consider putting some conduit down just for our future. But I don't know if we need as a board to maybe consider looking at what a one dig policy looks like. I don't have any knowledge of what that might look like or pros and cons to that. But I don't know if there's any other energy here about expanding that conversation.
I think it's a conversation worth having. And I think with the Black Hills, it's also their issue for redundancy on top of there is a demand, and some of that demand is out of our control as a county. But I think the redundancy issue is important, and the time frame too of trying to do for them to put down the conduit for Wi-Fi or internet in the future, that kind of stuff is going to prolong that project, which I'm already hearing flack from the community. Is why is the county doing this project when Independence Pass might not be open in time, and we're going to have McLean Flats shut down? And I'm like, well, and they didn't want to hear that it wasn't us, that it was, Black Hills. But so I think being able to expedite that. But I think one dig, we need to look at the parameters, because there are wet to dry utility issues, how far you can dig, how deep you can dig, and what you can move at one time. City of Aspen was supposed to have done that over here on Mill Street, which turned out not to happen. And there was a lot of community flack from that. So I think at least looking at it and seeing so we have it in place. So if we can do it in the future, we have a policy for one dig in place. I think that's a really good conversation we should have.
Okay. Any other questions from the board?
You guys do an amazing job with not as a lot. We'd love to give you that $56 million and say go.
And just to point out, with just a crew between engineering and road and bridge is 11 people, right? So it's not a big department.
So I think
it's handling a ton.
Big thanks to your whole staff.
And Romany, we need to work on that issue. You and me have been talking about it.
So thank you very much, GR.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming and giving us that thorough update.
Are we finished? Mr. Chairman, Acting Chairman?
Well, this is a work session, so unless there's any other business for the good of the order, we can leave and come back tomorrow at
noontime.
Regular meeting.
Noontime.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Quick, I can get upstairs before I'm locked out.